Take it off. Kayla's fingers flew to the clasp at the back of her neck so fast that one of her pearl earrings caught in her hair. She had been wearing Grandma Margaret's necklace for less than 2 minutes, but she was pulling at it as if the gold had turned hot against her skin. My mother reached for her. Kayla twisted away. My father stood beside the first row of chairs, with the expression of a man who had just realized the sentence he'd delivered so proudly might have destroyed the very thing he was trying to protect. Around us, nearly 100 wedding guests had gone quiet. The necklace slipped free, and Kayla stared at it in her palm before looking at the sealed letter I had handed her. "Mom," she said, and I had never heard my sister sound like that before. "Tell me this isn't true." 7 months later, I can tell you that the necklace was never the real inheritance. The lie attached to it was. Before I tell you how my parents managed to turn a family heirloom into the first crack in a story they had spent almost 6 years building around me, I hope you're doing well wherever you're listening from. Stay with me, because what happened after my sister read that letter was much bigger than what happened at my wedding, and some of the people who looked innocent in that room were anything but. And if you enjoy stories about families, secrets, and the moment someone finally stops carrying the blame that was never theirs, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. 3 minutes earlier, I had still been standing beside Ethan with both of my hands in his. It was January in Columbus, cold enough that the venue windows held a faint haze where the heated ballroom met the winter air outside, but I barely noticed. I had spent months making sure our wedding felt like ours. Ethan and I had paid for it ourselves. My parents had not chosen the venue, the guest list, the flowers, the menu, or the ceremony. That had been deliberate. I had been low contact with them for years, and inviting them did not mean giving them control. I had learned that distinction the hard way. There was only one part of the ceremony where I had allowed my mother a role. My grandmother Margaret had died the previous October at 86. Before she died, she had arranged for her necklace to be held until my wedding day. It was an old piece, understated compared with the jewelry people buy now. A narrow gold chain with a small oval pendant framed by tiny diamonds. Its value wasn't what mattered. My grandmother had worn it in every photograph I remembered from birthdays, graduations, Christmas dinners, and the rare family occasions that had ended without somebody leaving angry. She had been very clear that it was meant for me, and that I was to receive it when I married. Grandma had also asked for one thing that, in hindsight, should have warned me how much unfinished business she knew she was leaving behind. She wanted my mother to be the person who fastened it around my neck. Give her one chance to do something right without being forced, Grandma had told me. I had almost said no. Then I had decided that trusting my mother with a 3-minute ceremonial role was not the same thing as trusting her with my life. That was my mistake. Not because I should have known she would steal the moment, but because I had underestimated how badly she needed to control what the necklace meant. Our officiant finished the personal vows and said, "Before Lauren and Ethan exchange rings, Lauren wanted to take a moment to remember someone who should have been here today." Ethan squeezed my hand. I looked toward the empty chair in the first row where we had placed a small photograph of Grandma, and for a few seconds I let myself miss her without thinking about anything else. The wedding coordinator brought my mother the presentation box that had been delivered that morning. Mom took it carefully, almost reverently. For one stupid second, I thought she might actually do what Grandma had asked. She walked toward me. Then she walked past me. I turned my head as she stopped in front of Kayla. Kayla was sitting beside my father in the first row, wearing a pale blue dress and an expression I recognized immediately. It was the look she got when something flattering was happening, and she didn't quite understand why, but she was willing to accept it until someone objected. Mom opened the box. A strange sound passed through the room, not quite a gasp, more like people collectively realizing they had missed an announcement. "Mom," I said. She didn't look at me. She lifted Grandma's necklace and moved behind Kayla. Kayla touched her own collarbone. "What are you doing?" "Something your grandmother would have understood," Mom said. That was the first lie. She fastened the necklace around Kayla's neck. I heard one woman in the second row whisper my name. Someone farther back gave a confused little clap and immediately stopped when no one joined in. Ethan released one of my hands but stayed beside me. He didn't step in front of me. He didn't demand an explanation. He knew me well enough to wait until I decided what I wanted to do. My father stood. He had always been good at sounding reasonable. Even when he was saying something cruel, he never needed to raise his voice. That was one of the reasons people listened to him. It belongs to the daughter who deserves it, he said. There it was. 6 years reduced to 1 sentence. I looked at Kayla. She had gone very still, but she had not taken the necklace off. Then I looked at my mother. Her chin was lifted slightly. Dad had the solemn look of somebody correcting an old injustice instead of creating a new one. I understood then that this had not been impulsive. They had planned it. The necklace had never been the goal. The audience was. For almost 6 years, my parents had allowed one version of me to harden into family fact. I was selfish. I was cold. I thought I was better than everyone because I had a stable career and didn't call home every time something went wrong. And worst of all, I was the granddaughter, who had taken money from Grandma while she was recovering from surgery. I had denied it when it first happened. I had asked my parents to show me one document proving I had moved $1. They couldn't. I had told relatives who asked me directly that I had never taken Grandma's money. After that, I stopped performing innocence for people who had already decided what they wanted to believe. I told myself that was strength. Standing at my wedding, I realized silence had given my parents something I hadn't intended to give them. Time. Time to repeat their version. Time to turn suspicion into memory. Time to make Kayla the daughter who stayed close and me the daughter who couldn't be trusted. And now they were using Grandma's necklace to place a ceremonial seal over the whole story. I didn't argue. Instead, I turned toward the small table near the front where I had left my clutch before the vows. Inside were 2 envelopes Grandma had given me before she died. I had never opened either one. The first was addressed in her handwriting to a person who technically did not exist yet, to the woman who has given my necklace instead of Lauren. I picked it up. My mother saw the envelope and the color drained from her face. That reaction told me more than anything she had said. Dad moved first. Lauren, not now. I walked to Kayla. She looked from me to the envelope. What is that? Grandma gave it to me. For what? I held it out. Read this before you accept the necklace. Kayla stared at my hand. Mom stepped toward us. Your grandmother wrote a lot of things toward the end. She was angry. She was confused about certain situations. I looked at her. Then you shouldn't be worried about what it says. Mom stopped. Kayla took the envelope. Her fingers shook once as she opened it, but her voice was steady when she read the first line silently. I watched her eyes move down the page. At first there was suspicion on her face, as if she expected Grandma to scold her for accepting something meant for me. Then the suspicion disappeared. Her mouth opened slightly. She read another line. Then she looked at Mom. What money? Mom's expression changed. Kayla, this isn't the place. I almost laughed at that, but I didn't. Kayla kept reading. I could not see every word from where I stood, and Grandma had not told me exactly what was inside. She had only told me the envelope mattered if my parents broke her instruction. What I learned in that room came in fragments, from the lines Kayla read out loud without meaning to and from the parts she later showed me. Lauren did not take my money. Your mother moved it. Your father knew Lauren was innocent. A portion of that money was used to help you when your business was failing. You were told it came from your parents' emergency savings. Kayla stopped there. Her eyes lifted to Dad. You knew? Dad spread his hands. There is context you don't have. She looked back at the page. Mom said her name again, sharper this time. Kayla ignored her. When she reached the final paragraph, her face changed completely. Grandma had not accused Kayla of stealing. She had done something worse, at least from Kayla's point of view. She had taken away the excuse that whatever happened next was somebody else's decision. Kayla read the last lines twice. Then both hands went to the necklace. Take it off. Mom reached toward her. Kayla, take it off. Kayla twisted away so quickly the clasp caught. She pulled again, freed it, and dropped the chain into her palm. For a second, she looked at me like she expected me to take it. I could have. Maybe 6 years earlier, I would have grabbed it simply because I was tired of watching people take things from me and call it family. Instead, Kayla placed it back in the presentation box. The coordinator stepped forward to receive it. I stopped her. Let Kayla keep it for now. Every face around me seemed to turn at once. Kayla stared at me. Why? Because Grandma left you a choice. That necklace is yours. I know. Mom gave a short, disbelieving laugh. This is ridiculous. I looked at Kayla. Keep it until you decide what you're going to do with what you just read. I wasn't giving her my necklace. The trust documents were clear. The coordinator knew it. The law firm that had released the box that morning knew it. I was giving Kayla custody of the object our parents had just used to declare her better than me. I wanted to know what she would do when no one was standing at an altar telling her what kind of daughter she was supposed to be. Dad came toward me. Lauren, you are turning a misunderstanding into a spectacle. I looked around the room. No, you did that when you stood up. This is your wedding. I'm aware. Then act like it. That one almost got me. For 6 years, my father had been able to say something insulting in the tone of a man offering sensible advice and expect me to absorb the difference. I didn't. I turned to our coordinator. Patricia and Kenneth are leaving. Mom stared at me. Excuse me? You heard me. You're removing your own parents from your wedding because of a letter written by an 86-year-old woman who was not well? I felt something inside me go very cold. Grandma was well enough for you to use her necklace 5 minutes ago. Mom's jaw tightened. Dad looked toward the guests, probably calculating how far this could spread if he resisted. That was always his gift. Not remorse. Risk assessment. Fine, he said. We'll leave. But when this settles down, you are going to regret how you handled it. No, I said. I already regret how long I let you handle it. They left without security having to touch them. Mom walked first. Dad followed after one final look at me that I had seen many times before, the look that said I had failed to make his life easier. When the doors closed, I stood there in my wedding dress, with a room full of people, waiting to see what I would do. Ethan came back to my side. Quietly, he asked, "Do you want to stop?" I looked at him. No. You sure? I came here to marry you. His shoulders relaxed. Good, he said. Because I came here to marry you too. There were nervous laughs from a few guests, which was exactly what the room needed. The officiant asked whether we wanted a few minutes. I said no. We exchanged rings. We finished the ceremony. We kissed. People stood and applauded, and for the first time since Mom had walked past me with Grandma's necklace, I felt like I was back inside my own life. Later, while the guests moved toward cocktail hour, I went into the bridal room alone for a few minutes. The second envelope was still inside my clutch. For Lauren. Only. I opened it. Grandma's handwriting had gotten shakier in her final year, but I recognized every loop and slant. Lauren, there is something I owe you before anything else. I am sorry. I sat down. She wrote that she had known I did not take her money. Knowing had not been enough. She had waited for my parents to tell the truth because she had believed forcing the issue would break the family. Every month she waited had made their silence easier and mine heavier. I read one line 3 times. I told myself I was protecting this family. The truth is, I was protecting myself from watching it break. For years, I had never allowed myself to be angry at Grandma. She had been the one person in my family who told me she believed me. I had treated that as enough, because the alternative was admitting she could have done more. Sitting there in my wedding dress, I was angry with her. I loved her. I missed her. And I was furious that she had known. Both things could be true. Near the end, the letter changed. She told me she hoped I built the home I wanted, did work I was proud of, and surrounded myself with people who never required me to become smaller so they could remain comfortable. She told me not to spend my life proving something she had already known about me. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. I didn't feel healed. I felt seen. Those are not the same thing. The rest of the reception was strange. but it was mine. Ethan and I had our first dance. We cut our cake. I laughed with friends who had been trying very hard not to ask questions. A few relatives approached me with concerned faces and vague statements about how complicated families could be. I told every one of them the same thing. I'm not discussing it tonight. For once, I meant it. It was almost midnight when Ethan and I finally got upstairs to our room. I had removed my shoes and was standing at the sink trying to pull approximately 200 hairpins out of my head when my phone buzzed. Kyla. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the photograph attached. It was an old spreadsheet from the event design company she had owned 6 years earlier. Vendor settlements. Lease termination. Outstanding invoices. Payments her parents had made when the business collapsed. Below the image, Kayla had written, "I found the records." Another message appeared. They paid $31,400 for the business. I sat down on the edge of the bed. Grandma's letter had referred to more than $52,000 being moved from her accounts. I typed back, "Are you sure that was everything they gave you?" 3 dots appeared. Yes. I checked every vendor payment and the lease settlement, $31,400. Then, another message came through. "Lauren, if they took $52,600 from Grandma and I only got $31,400, where did the other $21,200 go?" I stared at that number until Ethan came out of the bathroom and saw my face. "What happened?" I turned the phone toward him. For almost 6 years, I had believed my parents had sacrificed my name to protect Kayla. That night, I realized Kayla only explained part of the money. Someone else in my family had needed rescuing too. 2 days after my wedding, I met Kayla at a coffee shop on the north side of Columbus because neither of us wanted to do this at my house, and I had no intention of going to hers. Neutral ground mattered. So did daylight. I arrived 10 minutes early, ordered black coffee, and chose a table near the windows where I could see the parking lot. Old habits from work, I suppose. I liked knowing where things were before a difficult conversation began. Kayla walked in wearing jeans, a gray coat, and no makeup. The version of my sister I had known most of my adult life would have treated looking exhausted as a personal failure. So seeing her that unpolished told me more than an apology would have. She spotted me, hesitated, then came over carrying a laptop bag. I brought everything I could find. I looked at the bag. "Everything about the business?" "Everything about the money." "That's not the same thing." She sat across from me. "I know." I waited. Kayla took off her coat and folded it over the chair beside her. "Before we start, I need you to know I didn't know it was Grandma's money." "You already said that." "I need you to believe me." "No. You want me to believe you." Her face tightened. "There's a difference," I said. "I'll look at what you have. I'll listen." "I'm not promising you anything before that." She stared at the table for a few seconds. "Fine." It was the first time in years that I had seen Kayla accept a boundary without immediately treating it like an insult. She opened her laptop. Her old event design company had been called North Star Events, which sounded much more successful than it had ever been. At 26, Kayla had been talented, ambitious, and terrible with risk. She had signed a 3-year commercial lease for a studio she did not need, hired 2 part-time assistants before revenue justified them, and spent aggressively on inventory because she believed saying yes to every client would make the company grow faster. For a while, it had looked as if she might be right. Then 3 large contracts fell through within the same quarter. One client canceled after a corporate merger. Another postponed a wedding indefinitely. A convention organizer disputed part of an invoice and delayed payment long enough to hurt cash flow. Kayla had personally guaranteed part of the lease and several vendor agreements. "How bad was it?" I asked. She clicked open a spreadsheet. "Worse than I told anyone at the time." I almost smiled at the irony. She saw it. "I know how that sounds." "Do you?" "Yes." She turned the laptop toward me. There were old invoices, settlement agreements, tax folders, scanned checks, vendor correspondence, and a lease termination document. Kayla explained that after North Star closed, her accountant had told her to keep the financial records for tax and liability reasons. Most of it had stayed untouched in cloud storage ever since. That answered one question I had already been asking myself. Why would someone who hated being reminded of a failed business keep 6-year-old records? Because sometimes failure comes with paperwork you are legally and financially smarter not to throw away. I started with the payments my parents had made. The first was $12,800 to the landlord as part of a negotiated lease termination. The second was $9,600 to 2 major vendors. The third was $6,000 to clear several smaller balances. The rest covered accounting fees, a storage bill, and one personal guarantee that had followed Kayla after the company stopped operating. I added the amounts twice, $31,400. Exactly what she had texted me after the wedding. "You're sure there weren't cash payments?" I asked. "My parents never gave me cash. Transfers directly to you?" "No." "Paid a credit card for you?" She shook her head. "Not for North Star." "Personal loan?" "No." I looked up. "You said they told you it was savings." "Mom did." "What exactly did she say?" Kayla leaned back, trying to remember. "That they had emergency money they'd set aside and that they were moving some things around so I wouldn't lose everything." "Did Dad say the same thing?" "He said they'd handle it." "That's not the same thing." "I know that now." I turned the laptop back toward her. "What did you know then?" Kayla folded her arms. "That I was about to lose the studio, get sued by vendors, and probably have a judgment on my credit. Mom called and told me she and Dad could cover the worst of it, and you didn't ask where $31,000 came from?" Her eyes hardened. "You're doing that thing." "What thing?" "Where you ask a question you already know makes me look bad." "No, I'm asking a question because it matters. They had savings. You knew that?" "I assumed it." There it was. I leaned back. Kayla looked away first. "You assumed," I said. "Yes. Because it was easier." Her head snapped back toward me. "You think I wanted to fail?" "That's not what I said." "You think I was sitting there calculating whose money I could take?" "No. I think you were scared. And when Mom gave you an answer that let you stop being scared, you didn't examine it very closely." She was quiet. That was different from denial. I continued. "And now you're asking me to believe you had no idea any of it came from Grandma." "I didn't. I'm not saying you did. You keep sounding like you are. I'm saying not knowing where the money came from does not automatically make every decision you made afterward innocent." Her mouth tightened. For a second, I could see the argument forming. Then she stopped herself. That mattered too. Kayla opened an old message thread. "There's something else." She scrolled back several years and handed me her phone. The message from Mom was dated 3 days before one of the vendor payments. "Your father and I moved some savings around. Don't discuss numbers with Lauren. She already has opinions about how you run the business, and I am not letting her make this harder." I read it again. Mom had been right about one thing. I had opinions about how Kayla ran that business. I had told her not to sign the studio lease. I had told her that owning inventory was not the same thing as owning revenue. I had told her that a company built on events should have enough cash to survive cancellations. Kayla had called me negative. Mom had called me jealous. Dad had told me to let my sister learn in her own way. Then, when Kayla's way failed, they had found $31,400 to make the consequences disappear. At the time, I had never known the exact number. I handed the phone back. "What did you think moved some savings around meant?" "That they took money from one account and put it somewhere else." "Whose account?" "Theirs." "Why?" "Because she said your father and I." "That tells you who was making the decision." "Not who owned the money." Kayla rubbed both hands over her face. "I know." "No, you know now." She dropped her hands. I held her gaze. "That distinction matters." She nodded once. Slowly. "I know now." That was better. Kayla clicked through another folder. There were messages after the payments, too. I read several. Mom telling Kayla to focus on rebuilding. Dad telling her this did not define her. Mom telling her not to let certain people make her feel guilty for accepting family help. She had not used my name in that message. She had not needed to. Kayla closed the folder. "I thought you knew Mom and Dad helped me. I knew they bailed you out. I thought that was why you were angry." I was annoyed. That's a nicer word. No, it's the accurate word. You made bad decisions, they erased the consequences, and then everyone acted like I was cruel for saying it was a pattern. But that wasn't why I stayed away. Kayla looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "Because of Grandma." Yes, the coffee shop had gotten louder around us without my noticing. Cups knocked against counters. Milk steamed. Someone near the door laughed too loudly. Kayla lowered her voice. I believed them. I know. They told me you had access to Grandma's information. They said you were helping her with bills and that money went missing. I know. Dad said you were having financial problems. I wasn't. I know that now. You could have known it then. She flinched. I did not soften it. 6 years earlier, at a family dinner I had attended against my better judgment, Kayla had cornered me near my aunt's dining room after everyone else had moved toward dessert. She had been 26, still humiliated by the failure of North Star, and furious that I refused to pretend none of it had been her fault. "Maybe Grandma finally saw who you really were," she had said. I remembered the exact expression on her face, because it had been one of those moments when someone says something designed to hurt you, and then waits to see if it landed. It had. I had not given her the satisfaction of seeing that. I had simply picked up my coat and left. Sitting across from her now, I said, "Do you remember what you told me at Aunt Carol's?" Kayla's eyes dropped. "Yes. Say it. Loren, say it." She swallowed. "I said maybe Grandma finally saw who you really were." "And what did you mean? That I thought you took the money?" "No, that's what you believed. I asked what you meant." She looked back up. I waited. Finally, she said, "I meant I thought Grandma had chosen me over you." There it was. Not the theft. The hierarchy. I nodded. "Thank you." "For what?" "For finally saying the part that mattered." Kayla's voice sharpened. "I already told you I was wrong. You told me you had bad information. What else do you want?" "I want you to understand that you liked the information." Her face went still. "You liked what it did," I continued. "It made every difference between us make sense in your favor. You were the daughter who needed help because you had a big heart and took risks. I was the daughter who didn't need help because I was cold. You stayed close to Mom and Dad because you were loyal. I stayed away because I was selfish." Then Grandma's money disappeared. And suddenly there was proof. That's not fair. It doesn't have to be comfortable to be fair. I didn't invent the story. No, you just benefited from it. Kayla stared at the window. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "You're right. I had expected resistance." The admission unsettled me more. She kept looking outside. "I didn't know where the money came from, but once they said you took it, I stopped asking questions." I said nothing. "I was angry at you anyway," she continued. "About the business. About how you talked to me before it failed. About how you always seemed like you had everything together. I didn't. You looked like you did. That isn't the same thing." "I know." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "You're going to make me stop saying that, aren't you?" "Probably." That almost broke the tension. Almost. Kayla opened another spreadsheet. "Here's what I don't understand." She showed me the payment summary again. $31,400. Then she pulled up a photo she had taken of Grandma's letter after the wedding. I had not asked her to send me the whole thing yet. The letter had been addressed to whoever received the necklace instead of me. Kayla still had the physical copy. She zoomed in on one paragraph. Grandma had written that more than $52,000 had been moved from her accounts while she was recovering. Kayla tapped the screen. 52,600. Yes. My business got 31,400. Yes. So, even if every dollar Mom paid for North Star came from Grandma, that leaves 21,200. Yes. Kayla looked at me. I could see the conclusion she wanted to jump to. Who got it? I don't know. Mom? Maybe. Dad? Maybe. Something for the house? Maybe. You're really going to keep saying maybe? Until we know. She leaned back with frustration. You don't think it was Mom? I think Mom moved the money because Grandma said she did. I do not know who benefited from the rest. But if she took it, then we find out where it went. Kayla stared at me. What? Nothing. That usually means something. She folded her hands. I thought you were going to be angrier. I am angry. You don't look angry. That's because anger isn't a research method. For the first time that morning, Kayla smiled. It disappeared quickly. So what do we do? There was the question I had been waiting for. The old version of our relationship would have answered automatically. I would have made the list. Assigned the tasks. Told her what documents to pull. Built the timeline. Managed her panic while pretending I was only managing the problem. That was one of my own patterns. I had spent years resenting my family for treating competence like an unlimited resource. But I had also trained them to expect it by stepping in whenever chaos made me uncomfortable. I closed her laptop. We each handle our own part. Kayla frowned. What does that mean? You keep your business records. You find anything mom or dad sent you about the bailout. Emails, texts, transfer confirmations, anything that shows what you were told. And you? I'll look at what I already have from Grandma and figure out what I can legally access through the trust. You're better at this. I know. Then why not just, because this isn't my mess to solve for you. Her jaw tightened again. I continued before she could argue. I'm trying to find out what happened to Grandma's money and why my name was used to cover it. That part is mine. Your part is figuring out what you accepted, what you were told, and what you repeated afterward. That sounds like punishment. No, it sounds like responsibility. Kayla looked at me for a long time. Then she nodded. Fine. Good. I'll send you copies, not originals. Good. And I'm not giving Mom or Dad a warning. Even better. That earned another brief smile. We packed up. At the door, Kayla stopped. Loren. I turned. The necklace is in my hotel safe. I know. I haven't worn it again. I didn't think you had. She looked embarrassed. I almost brought it today. Why didn't you? I didn't know if giving it back would look like I was trying to make you forgive me. That would have been my first thought. She gave a slow nod. Okay, keep it safe. For how long? Until you know why you're returning it. She looked like she wanted to ask what that meant. Then, for once, she let the question sit. I drove home with the numbers running through my head. 52,600. 31,400. 21,200. At work, discrepancies usually had boring explanations. Duplicate entries. Timing differences. Misapplied payments. Numbers were rarely dramatic on their own. Families were different. In families, missing numbers often belonged to missing truths. That evening, I made a simple timeline on my laptop. No theories, just dates, amounts, and what I knew for certain. Kayla's business had received $31,400. Grandma had documented $52,600 leaving her accounts. My mother had told Kayla the bailout came from family savings. My father had helped sell the story that I was the one who had taken Grandma's money, and $21,200 still had no name beside it. For 6 years, I had assumed my parents sacrificed me to save Kayla. Now the math was telling me something else. Kayla had only been the first rescue. There had been a second one. 3 days after Kayla and I compared the numbers, I sat across from a successor trustee in a conference room that smelled faintly of coffee, paper, and the lemon cleaner law offices seemed to buy in industrial quantities. The firm had handled Grandma Margaret's estate planning for years, including the living trust that held the necklace until my wedding. I had spoken with the trustee twice before, once when Grandma died, and once to confirm the wedding day delivery instructions, but this was the first time I had asked to see any of the records Grandma had specifically marked for me. I had spent the drive downtown reminding myself what I was not there to do. I wasn't looking for a lawyer to declare my parents guilty. I wasn't asking for somebody to turn Grandma's letter into a court order. I wasn't even certain yet that the missing $21,200 had anything to do with my father. What I wanted was a timeline built from records, not from 6 years of family stories. The trustee, a woman named Miss Whitaker, placed a gray archival box on the table between us. Margaret was very organized, she said, more organized than most people who come through this office. That sounds like her. She marked several folders with your name. Some were personal, some related to transactions she wanted preserved. I looked at the box. Did she tell you why? She told us there had been disagreements within the family about money and that she wanted the underlying records retained. That wording sounded like Grandma. Even when she was furious, she had preferred nouns like disagreement over betrayal. Miss Whitaker slid a document toward me first. It was not dramatic. No red stamp. No handwritten confession. Just a list of papers Grandma had deposited with the firm during the final year of her life. Copies of correspondence, household records, account statements, a small green ledger. I stared at that last line. You have the ledger? Miss Whitaker nodded. The original remains with the trust records for now, but you may review it here, and I can provide copies of the relevant pages. For the first time that morning, my pulse changed. Grandma had owned that ledger for years. It was dark green, about the size of a paperback novel, with a cracked elastic band around it. I remembered seeing versions of it on her kitchen table my entire life. She wrote down everything: grocery totals, checks, donations, doctor copays, money she lent to family members even when she insisted she did not expect it back. We had all teased her for it. Dad used to say she would write down the price of a cup of coffee before she finished drinking it. Mom once joked that Grandma kept records like the IRS was hiding in the bushes. Kayla and I had laughed too. Sitting in that conference room, I didn't feel like laughing. I opened the ledger carefully. Grandma's handwriting changed from year to year, but in the 2020 pages, it was still firm and precise. She had written dates down the left side and short notes beside them. Utilities, insurance, physical therapy, pharmacy. Then, in March, a number large enough to break the pattern. 12,800美元. There was no grocery store name beside it, no doctor, just a date and a small notation. P. Transfer. I turned the page. Another amount. 9,600美元. Then another. 6,000美元. The first 3 suspicious entries matched, within days, the payments in Kayla's business records. I pulled out my phone and opened the timeline I had made at home. The numbers lined up. Not perfectly enough to feel fictional. Real records rarely do. But close enough that I could see the shape. Then, several weeks later, another cluster appeared. 8,700美元. 7,500美元. 5,000美元. Total, $21,200. I sat back. There it was. Not an answer. A second pattern. Miss Whitaker watched me without interrupting. Can I ask something? I said. Of course. Were these bank transfers? Or is Grandma just recording amounts she thought were missing? The trust records include bank statements from that period. I cannot give you everything today because some of it is part of the accounting review, but yes, the statements show transfers and disbursements during the period when Patricia held financial power of attorney. My mother had authority to make them? She had authority to manage Margaret's accounts and pay expenses on Margaret's behalf. That does not mean every possible transfer would automatically be consistent with her fiduciary obligations. I appreciated the precision. So you're not saying they were illegal. I'm saying authority to access an account and authority to use funds for another person's benefit are not the same question. That was enough. It was also exactly the kind of distinction my mother had always hated. She preferred moral shortcuts. Someone needs help. Someone else has money. Therefore, help them. The person whose money it was became an inconvenience somewhere in the middle. I kept reading. Beside the second cluster of transfers, Grandma had written one line that made me stop. K knows. That was all. I copied the date into my timeline. A week later, another note appeared. Spoke to P and K. Both say they will replace it. I read it twice. For 6 years, Dad had lived inside the safest version of the story. Mom was emotional. Mom made decisions. Dad merely wanted everyone to calm down. If things went too far, he became the mediator. But Grandma had written both initials. Not Patricia. P and K. I turned another page. There were no more large transfers for several weeks. Then I saw a note written in darker ink. K says Lauren handled the paperwork. Says this will pass. I stared at it so long that Miss Whitaker finally asked, Are you all right? I looked up. I'm trying to decide what that means. I can't interpret Margaret's shorthand for you. I know. That was the problem. I knew what I wanted it to mean. I wanted it to mean my father had suggested blaming me. But wanting something to fit was how bad investigations were built. So I wrote the line down exactly as Grandma had written it. Nothing more. Kay says Lauren handled the paperwork. Says this will pass. Not conclusion. Not yet. Miss Whitaker handed me a printed email next. The sender was my mother. The date fell 4 days after the first large payment connected to Kayla's business. Grandma, please don't call Kayla about this. She thinks this came from our emergency savings, and there is no reason to drag her into a financial issue between adults. She is already under enough pressure. Kenneth and I will work this out with you. I read it once. Then again. The relief I felt surprised me. Not because it cleared Kayla of everything. It didn't. But it cleared one question. Grandma had not guessed that Kayla was unaware. Mom had told her. Directly. For the first time since the wedding, I had to let go of a conclusion I had carried for years. Kayla probably had not known where the money came from. That did not erase Aunt Carol's dinner. It did not erase the way she had used Grandma's missing money as proof that I was selfish and dishonest. But it changed the beginning of her role in the story. She had not taken Grandma's money. She had accepted a rescue without asking enough questions. Then, later, she had chosen a version of me that made that rescue easier to live with. Those were different failures. I had spent too much of my life around people who blurred those distinctions whenever it benefited them. I was not going to do the same thing just because I was angry. I put Mom's email beside my notes. Is there anything from Dad? Miss Whitaker handed me another page. The email was from Kenneth Bennett. Margaret, Patricia was trying to keep Kayla from losing everything she built. I know you are angry. We will make this right. Please give us time before you involve Kayla or the rest of the family. There is no reason for this to become bigger than it already is. I checked the date. It had been sent before the first time my father suggested to a relative that I had done something wrong. My chest tightened. Dad had not discovered the truth months later. He had known while the transfers were still fresh. He had known before I became the convenient explanation. I read the sentence again. We will make this right. 6 years later, he was still saying some version of it. Give us time. Don't make this bigger. Think about the family. The vocabulary changed. The strategy did not. I asked Miss Whitaker. Did Grandma respond? She printed a draft response. I don't know whether she sent it. The draft was short. Kenneth. Lauren did not take anything from me. Do not let anyone suggest otherwise. I expect every dollar replaced. I felt anger rise so fast I had to put the paper down. That was the sentence I had wanted Grandma to say 6 years earlier. Not privately. Not in a draft. Out loud. To everyone. I closed my eyes. For the first time since her death, I understood how easy it would have been to turn Grandma into a saint simply because she loved me. She had believed me. She had protected records. She had written letters. She had also waited. Those truths existed together. Ethan had asked me, after I read her private wedding letter, whether I was angry with her. At the time, I had said yes. Sitting in that conference room, I realized the answer was more complicated. I was angry because she had almost done the right thing so many times. She had written the words. She had preserved the evidence. She had seen what was happening. Then she had paused, hoping my parents would become people they had already proven they were not. I thought of the line from her private letter. Every month I waited made their silence easier and yours heavier. She had understood eventually. I wished understanding had come faster. I opened the ledger again. That was when I noticed the dates. The second cluster of transfers started in late May 2020. I had been so focused on the amounts that I had not asked what else happened around those dates. At work, dates mattered almost more than totals. A payment without timing was a number. A payment placed next to an event became a relationship. I wrote the second transfer date on my notepad. Then I wrote $21,200 underneath it. Dad had spent most of 2019 talking about a commercial investment he had made with 2 acquaintances. He never explained it clearly to me. something involving a warehouse property and a business tenant. At family dinners, he called it a side opportunity. Mom called it smart diversification. By 2020, they had stopped mentioning it. I had assumed it had quietly gone nowhere. I looked at Miss Whitaker. If someone had a civil judgment entered against them in Franklin County around this time, that would be public, right? In general, court dockets and judgments are public records. Yes. Thank you. She studied me. Lauren, be careful about making a public record prove more than it proves. I almost smiled. I was just telling Kayla the same thing 2 days ago. Good. I left the law office with copies of several marked pages from Grandma's ledger and the 2 emails. I did not call Kayla immediately. I wanted to see what I could verify before I gave either of us another theory to obsess over. Back at my office, I closed my door during lunch and searched the Franklin County court records. Kenneth Bennett was not a rare enough name to give me one clean result, but adding the business name I remembered narrowed it quickly. There it was, a civil case filed in late 2019. I opened the docket. I had enough experience reading contracts and vendor disputes to understand the basic structure without pretending I was a lawyer. My father had signed a personal guarantee connected to a commercial obligation. The underlying business defaulted. The creditor pursued him. Several months later, judgment was entered. $21,200 and change after costs. I stared at the screen. The amount was close enough that the back of my neck went cold. Then I found the satisfaction filing. The judgment had been marked satisfied in June 2020. I pulled up Grandma's timeline. Second transfer cluster. Late May into early June. Dad's judgment satisfaction. Days later, I wrote both dates side by side. Then I forced myself to stop. Timing was not proof of source. The public docket did not tell me who paid the judgment. Maybe Dad had borrowed from a friend. Maybe he had liquidated something. Maybe Mom had paid it from legitimate marital savings while stealing separately from Grandma for some other reason. I did not know. But for the first time, I had a plausible answer to the $21,000 question. And the answer had my father's name attached to it. I called Kayla that evening. She answered on the second ring. What did you find? Hello to you too. Lauren. I found records Grandma preserved. Mom emailed her after the bailout. Silence. What did she say? She said you believed the money came from our parents' emergency savings. Kayla did not respond immediately. When she did, her voice was quieter. So Grandma knew I didn't know. Yes. Oh, that doesn't erase the rest. I know. I waited. She corrected herself. I understand. Better. What else? Dad emailed Grandma too. Kayla inhalet. He knew? Very early. How early? Before the family started blaming me. She swore under her breath. I continued. And there's something else, but I need you to hear the wording I'm using. I found a public court judgment against Dad from 2020. It was for almost exactly $21,200. Kayla went silent again. When was it paid? Days after the second group of transfers from Grandma's account. So that's where the money went. No. Lauren, come on. No, that's a theory. You really think that's a coincidence? I think I don't know yet. She exhaled sharply. If this were anybody else, I would still want the next document. You sound like you're at work. That's probably why I'm not making mistakes. Kayla was quiet for a few seconds. Then she said, What did Grandma write in the ledger? I hesitated. There was one line I had not yet decided whether to share. Not because I wanted to hide it, because I knew what Kayla would hear. And I knew what I would hear too. Kay knows, I said. That was beside the transfers. Then later she wrote that Mom and Dad both promised to replace the money. That's enough for me. It isn't for me. What else? I looked at my copy. Kay says Lauren handled the paperwork, says this will pass. Kayla stopped breathing for a second. What does that mean? I don't know. Yes, you do. No. I know what I'm afraid it means. Dad told them to blame you. Maybe. Why are you protecting him? That question irritated me enough that I stood up from the kitchen table. I'm not protecting him. I'm protecting myself from building a case around what I want to be true. You want it to be true? I want there to be an explanation for why my own father spent 6 years looking me in the face while people called me a thief. Kayla's voice softened. Lauren, I am not giving him the benefit of the doubt. I'm giving facts the benefit of being facts. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then she asked, what do we do now? We keep going. Where? I want to know exactly when Dad knew about the second transfer, what he told Grandma, and whether there's anything tying that judgment to the money besides timing. And the line about you? That too. After we hung up, Ethan found me still sitting at the kitchen table with Grandma's ledger copies spread around my laptop. He took one look at my face and pulled out the chair across from me. You found something. I found Dad. That sounds significant. It might be. I showed him the court docket and the transfer dates. He read them without interrupting. Then he looked at Grandma's note. Kay says Lauren handled the paperwork. Says this will pass. What do you think it means? He asked. I think he knew exactly how useful I was. Ethan did not tell me I was wrong. He also did not tell me I was right. Instead, he asked, what would make you sure? That was why I had married him. Not because he rescued me. Because he respected the difference between wanting an answer and earning one. I need to know what happened between Grandma, confronting them, and the first time Dad told anyone I was responsible. Ethan nodded. And the $21,000? I need something more than matching dates. He looked again at the judgment amount. That's one hell of a match. Yes, but not proof. No. I gathered the papers slowly. The ledger. Mom's email. Dad's email. The court record. For 6 years, I had thought the story was simple. My mother stole Grandma's money to save Kayla. My father covered for her. My sister benefited. I was the easiest person to blame. Now one part of that story had already changed. Kayla probably had not known, and another part was beginning to change with it. My father might not have been standing beside my mother while she protected somebody else. He might have been the somebody else. I looked at the satisfaction date one more time. The second set of money had left Grandma's accounts. Days later, my father's $21,200 judgment disappeared from the public docket as satisfied. For the first time since the wedding, the missing money had a destination that made sense. And for the first time in 6 years, I stopped wondering why my father had protected my mother. I started wondering who had protected him. My father called me the next morning at 7:42, which was early enough that I knew he had chosen the time on purpose. Dad had always believed conversations went better when he caught people before they were fully prepared for them. I was already dressed for work and standing at the kitchen counter with coffee when his name lit up my phone. I let it ring twice before answering. Lauren, Dad, I think you and I need to talk without your mother there. That almost made me laugh. 3 days earlier, Mom had been the person standing beside him while he told a room full of wedding guests that my sister was the daughter who deserved Grandma's necklace. Now suddenly privacy mattered. About what? You know what? I know several things. You'll have to be more specific. He sighed. This is exactly why I wanted to talk in person. Then ask. There was a pause long enough for me to picture him deciding whether I was being difficult or whether saying that out loud would make things worse. Lunch, he said. Just you and me. I glanced at the clock. I have meetings until 1. 1:30? I almost refused. Then I thought about Grandma's ledger, the old email where Dad had promised to make things right, and the civil judgment that had disappeared days after the second group of transfers. 1:30. He chose a restaurant near his side of town, a place we had eaten at when I was younger, because Dad liked that the booths were high enough to make every table feel private. I arrived first and picked one where I could see the entrance. He came in exactly on time, wearing a navy quarter zip and the expression he used at funerals, disciplinary conversations, and meetings with contractors who had overcharged him. Calm concern. Reasonable disappointment. Nothing anyone could point to and call aggression. He sat across from me and ordered iced tea. You look tired, he said. I got married 4 days ago. You know that's not what I mean. I know. The server left. Dad folded his hands on the table. I'm going to say something, and I need you to listen before you decide I'm attacking you. That sentence usually comes before an attack. Lauren, go ahead. He took a slow breath. Your mother made a serious mistake 6 years ago. I waited. He looked at me as if he expected relief. What mistake? She used Margaret's money when she shouldn't have. He still couldn't say stole. What did she use it for? At first? Kayla. And after that? His eyes shifted almost imperceptibly. We'll get to that. No, we can get to it now. I asked you to listen. I'm listening. Dad leaned back. Your mother panicked when Kayla's business started collapsing. She thought one bad year was going to ruin her credit and follow her for a decade. Margaret refused to help. Patricia thought she could move some money temporarily and replace it before anyone was hurt. Did Grandma authorize her to do that? You know she didn't. Good. I wanted to hear you say it. His jaw tightened. This is why talking to you is difficult. You turn every sentence into testimony. No. Testimony has rules. Say? I took a drink of water and said nothing, he continued. I found out after Patricia had already moved the money. That was the sentence I had been waiting for. I kept my face neutral. How long after? I don't remember exactly. Before or after Grandma noticed? After. Before or after Kayla's vendors were paid? I wasn't tracking individual payments. Before or after you emailed Grandma promising that we would make it right? For the first time, his calm expression cracked. Not much. Just enough. He looked at me for a second before answering. You've seen that email. Yes. That was after your mother told me what she had done. How much after? Lauren, 6 years ago I was not recording dates for a future interrogation. Neither was I. Grandma was. He looked away. The server brought his tea. Dad thanked her, waited until she left, then lowered his voice. I knew there was money involved. I did not know the full amount. That was different from, I found out later. Not proof of anything else. But different. How much did you think Mom had taken? I don't remember. 31,000? I don't know. 50? 2,000? He stared at me. I said I don't know. I nodded. Okay. He frowned. That's it? For that question. You don't believe me. I don't know whether I believe you. His hand tightened around the tea glass. When did you become like this? Specific? Suspicious. I almost answered with 6 years ago, but I didn't. That would have been too easy. Probably when people started accusing me of theft without evidence. He leaned back. I never accused you of theft. I looked at him. That was such a clean lie, I admired it for half a second. Do you want to try that again? I said there were questions. At Aunt Carol's Christmas dinner, you told Uncle Ray I knew exactly what I'd done. That is not the same thing as saying you stole money. At Grandma's house after Easter, you told me the family wouldn't trust me until I made things right. You were refusing to explain yourself. I had already explained myself. You walked out. After you told me to apologize. For the damage. For stealing money I didn't steal. His mouth tightened again. This was how Dad argued. He would move half an inch at a time until the original point became difficult to see. I wasn't doing that anymore. You knew Mom moved Grandma's money, I said. You knew before people started blaming me. That's what your own email shows. I knew she had moved some money. And you let people believe it was me. I was trying to keep the situation from exploding. That's not an answer. It is an answer you don't like. No, it's a description of your motive. I asked what you did. He stared at me. I let the silence stay. Eventually, Dad looked down at the menu, even though neither of us had opened ours. You want me to say I handled it badly? That would be a start. Fine. I handled it badly. It sounded like someone admitting he had forgotten to renew a license. I waited. Nothing else came. Then he said, But your mother was the one who made the financial decision. There it was. I leaned back. Dad noticed. What? Nothing. You just did that thing with your face. What thing? The thing where you decide. You figured something out. I haven't figured anything out. You think I'm blaming your mother. Aren't you? I'm telling you who moved the money. Grandma already did that. Then what exactly do you want from me? Truth. You have it. No, I have portions. His eyes hardened. You're enjoying this. That one surprised me. Enjoying what? Having something over us. I thought about my wedding. Kayla ripping the necklace off her neck. Mom saying Grandma had been confused. Dad warning me I would regret how I handled it. Grandma's private letter sitting in my bedroom at home. No, I said. If I were enjoying this, I'd be a much worse person than you think I am. Dad stared at me for a moment, then did something I hadn't expected. He changed direction. I can fix the part involving you. I narrowed my eyes. What does that mean? I can call the family. I said nothing. I can tell Carol, Ray, Diane, whoever else needs to hear it, that you did not take Margaret's money. The sentence landed strangely. For 6 years, some part of me had wanted exactly that. Not an apology. A correction. Dad leaned forward. I can end that. I looked at him. You could have ended it 6 years ago. Yes. But you didn't. I'm offering to now. For free? His face changed. What? You don't offer things for free. Lauren, what do you want? He looked offended just long enough to confirm that I had asked the right question. I want you to stop turning this into an estate dispute. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because there it was. Cleanly. You'll clear my name if I stop looking at Grandma's records. That is not what I said. It's exactly what you said. No. I said there is no reason to drag attorneys and trustees into a family matter that can be handled privately. The trustee is already involved because Grandma put her assets in a trust. You know what I mean. I do. Then stop twisting it. I leaned forward. Dad, you are offering to return something that never belonged to you, in exchange for me not asking where Grandma's money went. His face reddened slightly. I am offering to help repair your relationship with this family. I'm not asking you to repair my relationship with them. You just said you wanted the truth corrected. I do. That doesn't make it currency. That's not what this is. Then call them anyway. He went silent. I waited. Call them, I repeated. Tell them I didn't take Grandma's money. No conditions. He looked toward the window. That was my answer. He sat back. For the first time, something in me settled. Not because I knew where the missing money went. I didn't. Not because I knew Dad had taken it. I didn't know that either. But I knew one thing for certain. My innocence had always been available to him. He had simply treated it as something he could release when the cost became acceptable. The server returned and asked whether we were ready to order. Dad said he had lost his appetite. I ordered soup. He gave me a look. What? You're staying? I blocked the hour. He shook his head as if I had become impossible. Maybe I had. Good. When the server left, I opened my phone. I found the judgment. Dad stopped moving. What judgment? The one from 2020. His expression flattened. I have no idea what you're talking about. The personal guarantee connected to the commercial investment. He looked down at the table. That. Yes, that. What about it? $21,200. He gave a short laugh. You think because the number is close, I took Margaret's money. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Actually, I do have to. That's the point. His eyes narrowed. The judgment was satisfied days after the second cluster of transfers from Grandma's account. Dad leaned back. So now you're searching court records. They're public. You sound proud of that. I sound accurate. That debt had nothing to do with Margaret. Then how was it paid? A business associate helped settle it. Who? Someone you don't know. Was it a loan? Yes. Written? He stared at me. Do you carry loan documents for every conversation now? No, just conversations where someone is asking me to stop looking at records. Dad's jaw worked. I kept my voice calm. I'm not saying Grandma's money paid your judgment. You clearly think it did. I think the timing is worth understanding. It was 6 years ago. The number didn't get less precise because 6 years passed. That money was handled. The judgment was handled. Margaret is dead. Patricia made a mistake. What exactly do you think happens if you keep digging? There was something almost honest in that question. Not remorse. Fear. I looked at him. I find out what happened. And then? That depends on what happened. Dad rubbed a hand across his forehead. This is what I mean, you're acting like some auditor. I work in operations. Unexplained money and contradictory timelines bother me. This is your family, not a logistics report. Maybe that's why nobody ever reconciled the numbers. His face went cold. My soup arrived. He didn't speak until the server left. Then he said, You want to believe the worst about us. I picked up my spoon. No, I spent 6 years doing the opposite. Dad left before I finished eating. He paid for his tea at the front and did not say goodbye. I sat there another 10 minutes, not because I needed time to recover, but because I wanted to write down exactly what he had said while it was fresh. Patricia made the financial decision. I found out after. I did not know the full amount. I can call the family. Stop turning this into an estate dispute. A business associate helped settle the judgment. None of those statements proved he had taken anything. But they showed me where the pressure points were. That afternoon, Aunt Carol called. I nearly let it go to voicemail. Then I remembered Dad looking toward the restaurant window when I told him to clear my name without conditions. I answered, "Hi, Aunt Carol." "Oh, honey." I closed my office door. That opening usually meant someone had decided I was wounded enough to be managed. "I heard you met with your father." That had taken less than 3 hours. "I did. He's very upset." "I'm sure. Your mother is too." "I'm sure," Carol sighed. "Lauren, I'm not calling to take sides." Everyone who said that took a side within 30 seconds. I just think Margaret would hate seeing all of this happen. There it was. Which part? What? Which part would Grandma hate? The fighting, lawyers, digging through old financial issues. I haven't hired a lawyer to fight anyone. Your father said the estate people are involved. The successor trustee is reviewing records Grandma preserved. That sounds like lawyers to me. I looked out my office window at the gray January sky. "Aunt Carol, can I ask you something?" "Of course. 6 years ago, did you believe I took Grandma's money?" Silence. Then carefully. "I believed there were concerns. That wasn't my question. I didn't know what to believe. You stopped inviting me to some family dinners. That was because everything was uncomfortable. You told Kayla you didn't want valuables left out when I visited your house." Another silence. She remembered. "So yes," I said. "You believed it. I was told things. Okay, what does that have to do with now? If you believed I stole more than $50,000 from Grandma, why did you never ask me to repay her?" Carol said nothing. I continued. "Why didn't anyone tell Grandma to report it? She didn't want police involved. Why didn't anyone demand the money back from me? I don't know. Why was I still allowed to visit her alone? I don't know, Lauren. Why did Grandma leave me her necklace? That's complicated. No, that one is actually simple." Carol sounded irritated now. "You're putting me on the spot for something your parents told us. I'm not asking you to solve it. I'm asking whether the story ever made sense." She didn't answer, and that was the first time I understood how little structure the accusation had ever needed. Nobody had treated me like someone who had actually stolen $52,000. They had treated me like someone whose moral character had been downgraded. That was enough. The accusation had never needed police reports, repayment demands, bank records, or even a coherent explanation. It had only needed repetition. "Carol," I said, "I'm not asking you to choose between me and my parents. I'm asking you not to call me and ask me to protect a version of events you can't explain." Her voice softened. "I'm sorry you were hurt. That isn't the same as saying you were wrong." She exhaled. "No, it isn't." We ended the call politely. I did not feel victorious. I felt tired, but underneath the exhaustion was something cleaner. For years, I had assumed extended family members had seen evidence I hadn't. Maybe Mom had shown them something. Maybe Dad had explained some bank detail. Maybe there was a reason people sounded so certain. Aunt Carol's call told me otherwise. They had heard a story. That was all. Kayla came over after work that evening. She brought takeout and a folder of additional old messages she had printed because, in her words, staring at her phone was making her want to throw it. I told her about lunch with Dad. She didn't touch her food. He said Mom did it. He said Mom made the financial decision. That sounds like yes. It sounds like he wants responsibility concentrated in one place. And the judgment? He says a business associate loaned him the money. Kayla stared at me. "Do you believe that?" "I don't know. Lorraine, I don't. You saw the dates." "Yes." "The amount." "Yes." "Grandma's note said he knew." "Yes." "So Dad got the money." "Probably." "Probably?" I pushed the folder back toward her. "Kayla, I'm going to say this once. The court docket proves Dad owed about $21,200. It proves the judgment was satisfied shortly after the second set of transfers from Grandma's account. Grandma's ledger proves Dad knew something about the missing money. His email proves he knew Mom had moved money before the family blamed me. And that's not enough? It's enough to ask harder questions. It is not enough to say we know who paid the judgment. She stared at me like I was deliberately refusing the obvious. If you were sitting on a jury, I'm not. If this were anyone else, I would still want the source. Kayla dropped her fork. You're giving him more fairness than he gave you. That landed. I looked at her. She realized it immediately. I didn't mean, yes, you did. She closed her mouth. I took a breath. You're right about one thing. Dad didn't give me this much benefit of the doubt. Then why are you giving it to him? Because I'm not trying to become him. That ended the argument. Kayla looked down at her food. After a moment she said, Okay. I nodded. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Mom. I almost ignored it. Kayla saw the name on the screen. What does she want? I opened it. There were 4 sentences. Lauren, I know Kenneth met with you today. I also know what he is trying to do. If he told you I moved that money without him knowing until afterward, he lied. Do not let him rewrite this and leave me holding all of it. I read it twice. Kayla leaned forward. What? I turned the phone toward her. She read the message. Her expression changed halfway through. Oh my God. I didn't say anything. Mom had not apologized. She had not denied moving the money. She had not defended Dad. She had done something more useful. She had told me there were now 2 versions of the same secret inside the same marriage. Dad's version was simple. Patricia made a mistake, and he found out later. Mom's version had arrived in 4 blunt sentences. He knew. And whatever Dad thought he was doing by separating himself from her, Mom had no intention of letting him survive the story alone. Mom chose a restaurant I had never been to, which told me she didn't want the conversation anywhere that belonged to either of us. It was a quiet Italian place, tucked behind a shopping center. The kind of restaurant with dark booths, low music, and enough distance between tables that nobody had to hear anyone else's family problems unless voices rose. I arrived 5 minutes early and found her already seated in the back with a glass of water untouched in front of her. She looked tired, but not broken. My mother had always been very good at arranging herself before difficult conversations. Her hair was done. Her coat was folded beside her. Her purse sat on the bench within reach, even after texting me that Dad was trying to leave her, holding all of it. She still looked like someone who had come prepared to explain why everyone else was overreacting. I ordered coffee, she said when I sat down. I'm fine. You always say that. I usually mean it. She looked at me for a moment, then glanced toward the server walking away. Did Kenneth tell you I did everything without him knowing? He told me you made the financial decision. That sounds like him. He also said he found out later. Mom laughed once, without humor. Later. I waited. She picked up her water, took one sip, and put it down again. Before we get into what your father is doing now, you need to understand what was happening then. There was the opening. Not I'm sorry. Not I lied about you. Context. I folded my hands on the table. Go ahead. Mom leaned back. Kayla was 26. Her business was collapsing. She had vendors threatening collections, a lease she couldn't get out of, and personal guarantees she had no business signing. I know. No, Lauren. You know the numbers now. You didn't know what it looked like then. I knew enough to tell her not to sign that lease. Mom's mouth tightened. That is exactly what I mean. What? You always knew what people should have done after they were already scared. I told her before. She was trying to build something, and I never told her not to. You made her feel stupid. No. I told her the rent was too high and the cash reserve was too low. You hear yourself, don't you? Yes. I didn't apologize for it. Mom leaned forward. When Kayla called me, she was crying so hard I could barely understand her. She thought she was going to lose everything. Her business, her credit, her apartment if creditors started coming after her. She thought her life was over. She was 26. That doesn't make panic less real. I didn't say it did. Your grandmother did. That got my attention. What did Grandma say? Mom's expression changed into something old and resentful. She said Kayla needed to learn from the consequences. I could hear Grandma saying that, not cruelly, firmly. And you thought that was unacceptable. I thought it was heartless. Because she wouldn't give Kayla $30,000. Because she could help and chose not to. I sat back. There it was. The belief under everything. Having the ability to help meant having the obligation to do it. And if someone disagreed, Mom believed the moral right transferred to her. Did Grandma tell you not to use her money? I asked. Mom looked annoyed. Not in those words. Did she authorize you to pay Kayla's business debts? She gave me power of attorney. That wasn't my question. She gave me authority over the accounts. To manage them for her. To manage them. For her benefit. Mom's voice sharpened. Do you think I don't know what the document said? I think you're avoiding what it meant. She looked away. I continued. Did Grandma say, Patricia, use my money to pay Kayla's lease settlement? No. Did she tell you to pay the vendors? No. Did she tell you to cover Kayla's personal guarantees? No. Then you made that decision yourself. Mom pressed her lips together. I made a decision to protect my daughter. With someone else's money. It was family money. No, it was Grandma's money. Lauren, please don't do this. Do what? Reduce everything to ownership. I almost laughed. We're talking about $52,600 leaving someone's bank account without her permission. Ownership seems relevant. Mom stared at me. You've always been like this. Specific, cold. I knew that word. I had heard it my entire adult life whenever I refused to turn somebody else's emergency into my obligation. If wanting the person whose money it was to have a say makes me cold, fine. That's not what I mean. Then tell me what you mean. Mom exhaled slowly. When Kayla was drowning, your grandmother wanted to teach her a lesson. I wanted to save her. And you decided saving her mattered more than Grandma's right to say no. I decided that family does not stand around watching someone lose everything when it can be prevented. Did Kayla know you took Grandma's money? Mom hesitated. No. That was the first clean answer she had given me. You told her it was emergency savings. Yes. Why? Because she was already humiliated. So you lied to her. I protected her. Those are not opposites. Mom's eyes flashed. You think you're so much better because you would have made her lose the business. No. I think if her business failed because she made bad decisions, then the failure was hers to deal with. That's easy for you to say. Why? Because you never needed rescuing. That sentence settled between us. I knew it wasn't true, but I also knew what she meant. I had needed help before. I had just learned early not to expect it from my family, unless I was willing to give them control over the terms. I didn't say that. Instead, I asked, how much did you take for Kayla? Mom looked down at the table. You already know. I know what her records say. Then why ask? Because I want to hear what you say. She hated that. About 31,000. 31,400? Yes. And the other 21,200? Her face changed. There was no surprise. Not confusion. Only calculation. I waited. Mom reached for her water again. Your father had a problem. What kind of problem? You found the judgment. Yes. Then you know. I know he had a civil judgment. I don't know who paid it. Mom said nothing. I leaned forward. Did Grandma's money pay Dad's judgment? She looked toward the window. Not all of it went directly to the judgment. That wasn't my question. Some of it was moved around. Mom. She turned back to me. Your father had made an investment that went bad. He had signed a guarantee. He thought the business would recover. It didn't. The creditor came after him personally. And we had already used savings helping Kayla. I understood before she said the rest. You took more from Grandma. Mom's jaw tightened. Yes. The word came out flat. Not dramatic. Not tearful. Yes. For a moment I said nothing. It was one thing to line up numbers and dates. It was another to hear the person who made the transfers admit that there had been 2 rescues. Kayla first. Dad second. Did Dad know where that money came from? Mom looked at me as if I had insulted her intelligence. Of course he did. I kept my face still. Before it was transferred? Yes. How much did he know? He knew enough. That means what? It means he knew your grandmother had refused to help Kayla. He knew I had moved money anyway. He knew we were supposed to replace it. Before his judgment was paid. Yes. That erased another piece of Dad's lunch story. He hadn't found out later. He hadn't simply been dragged into Patricia's mistake. He had known before the second rescue. Did he ask you to use Grandma's money for him? Mom's expression hardened. I'm not going to sit here and let him make me the criminal while he pretends he had no part in it. That wasn't my question. He knew. Did he ask? Mom looked away again. Then she said, "He didn't stop me." That's different. You think that matters? It matters if we're trying to understand what happened. She laughed bitterly. There you go again. What? Turning your father into some passive observer because he knows how to sit quietly. I'm not turning him into anything. I'm asking what he did. Mom leaned forward. Fine. He told me we could replace it before Margaret ever needed to know. That was closer. What exactly did he say? I don't remember every word. Did he say to take the money? He said we were already in it, and we needed to keep the family from falling apart. That still doesn't answer whether he asked. He benefited from it, Lauren. I know. Then why are you working so hard to separate his hands from mine? I'm not. It feels like you are. That's because Dad is trying to put everything on you. And you want me angry enough at him that I stop asking what you chose. Mom sat back. For the first time, she looked genuinely stunned. Then hurt. You think I'm manipulating you. I think both of you are trying to control where I look. That's unfair. No. Unfair was using me as cover. She went still. The noise in the restaurant seemed to pull back. I watched her face carefully. You knew I didn't take the money. Mom looked down. Yes. You knew. Yes. And you let people think I did. We never filed a police report. I stared at her. That is your defense? No. It sounds like one. I'm saying this became something larger than what we intended. Who is we? Mom's eyes lifted to mine. Your father and me. I felt something tighten in my chest. Then tell me how it started. She shook her head. People knew you had been helping Margaret. That isn't how rumors start. That's how rumors sound plausible after someone starts them. Carol asked questions. Because someone told her money was missing. Margaret was upset. Grandma told Carol I stole from her? Mom didn't answer. That's what I thought. I leaned closer. Who said my name first? Mom's expression changed. It was small, but I saw it. Not guilt exactly. Hesitation. Lauren, it was 6 years ago. Who said my name first? I don't remember. You remember Kayla crying on the phone. You remember Grandma refusing to help. You remember Dad's judgment. You remember what he said about replacing the money. But you don't remember who first suggested I might have taken it. It wasn't a meeting. What does that mean? It wasn't like we sat down and planned some campaign against you. I didn't say you did. People started putting pieces together. No. People started being given pieces. Mom's mouth tightened. You had access to paperwork. I had access to envelopes and statements Grandma asked me to sort. I did not have authority over her accounts. People didn't know the difference. You did. Yes. Dad did. Yes. And Grandma did. Mom said nothing. So the only people who mattered knew I couldn't have done what you were letting everyone believe. You could have gotten account information. There it was. I felt my anger sharpen. Do you actually believe that? No. Then don't say it. I'm telling you why people believed it. People believed it because someone kept feeding them a version that made me look guilty. Mom's face hardened. You had already distanced yourself from the family. So that made me convenient. You were angry with us. That made me guilty? I'm not saying that. You keep almost saying it. Mom folded her arms. You want everything to be clean. One person did this. One person said that. One person is guilty. Families aren't like that. No, families are usually messier. But money still moves from one account to another. Emails still have dates. People still make choices. She shook her head. You sound just like Margaret. That surprised me. Maybe that's why she trusted me. Mom laughed again, but this time there was real anger in it. Trusted you? She controlled everyone with money. I went still. There was a new edge in Mom's voice now. Not defense. Resentment. She made people ask, Mom continued. She liked deciding who deserved help, and who didn't. Kayla was supposed to fail because Margaret thought it would build character. Kenneth was supposed to lose his savings because she didn't approve of the investment. She had more than enough to help both of them. Enough according to who? According to anyone with eyes. It was still hers. She was 80. I felt something cold move through me. So she wasn't using most of it. I stared at my mother. There it was. Not just panic. Not just rescue. Entitlement. Grandma had money she wasn't using. Therefore, Mom had decided it could be reassigned. You really believed that? Mom blinked. What? That because Grandma was old and had money, she owed it to whoever you thought needed it. I believed family resources should help family. Even when the person who owned them said no. Margaret could be stubborn. That's not incapacity. She changed toward the end. I recognized the direction immediately. Were you planning to tell me she was confused again? I'm telling you her judgment wasn't always good. Was her judgment good enough to leave me the necklace? Mom's eyes narrowed. Don't do that. Why not? That necklace was emotional. Apparently emotional enough for you to redirect it at my wedding. She was trying to send messages from beyond the grave. No, she left written instructions. She wanted to punish us. Then why did you follow enough of her instructions to take the necklace onto the altar? Mom's face flushed. I continued. If Grandma was confused, stubborn, irrational, and manipulative, why did you need to publicly announce that Kayla deserved the necklace? Why not ignore the whole thing? Mom said nothing. You needed the necklace, I said quietly. Because if Grandma still chose me after all these years, people might start asking why. Her eyes changed. That was the first moment I knew I had hit something she hadn't prepared to explain. You don't know what people would have asked. I know what Dad said. It belongs to the daughter who deserves it. Mom looked away. That wasn't about the money. It was exactly about the money. No. Then what was it about? Family. I almost laughed. Everything becomes family when you need it to stop being someone's responsibility. She pushed her chair back slightly. I came here because Kenneth is trying to rewrite history. And you are trying to justify it. I am trying to tell you why I did what I did. Then tell me. I already have. No, you told me Kayla needed rescuing. Dad needed rescuing. Grandma had money. That explains why you took it. It doesn't explain why I became the thief. Mom looked at me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she said something I did not expect. I should have stopped it. Not I shouldn't have started it. I should have stopped it. I heard the distinction immediately. Stopped what? The way people talked about you. Who started it? Mom's eyes shifted. Does it matter now? Yes. Why? Because you just changed the sentence. What sentence? You didn't say, I shouldn't have said it. You said, I should have stopped it. Her face went blank. I leaned forward. Mom, did you choose me? She stared at me. What? As the scapegoat. Was it you? Her lips parted, then closed. For the first time since we sat down, she looked uncertain rather than defensive. I went along with things I shouldn't have. That's not an answer. You want me to give you a villain. I already have 2 parents who knew I was innocent. She flinched. Good. Who said my name first? Mom picked up her purse. I didn't move. You're leaving? I have said enough for today. You've said a lot. I know. She stood. I looked up at her. Dad told me you made the financial decision. He would. You're telling me he knew before the second transfer. He did. You admit you moved the money for Kayla and then for him. Yes. And you admit you let people believe I took it. Her face tightened. I should have corrected it. That isn't what I asked. She looked toward the restaurant entrance. Your father is very good at making a decision sound like something that simply happened. I felt my pulse change. What does that mean? Mom picked up her coat. It means if he is telling you I created every part of this story by myself, ask yourself why he was so comfortable repeating it. Then she left. I sat there with my coffee untouched and a check neither of us had asked for. I had gone into the meeting wanting 3 answers. I got through. Mom admitted the first $31,400 went to Kayla. She admitted the second group of money was connected to Dad's judgment problem. She confirmed Dad knew before the second transfer and before my name became family shorthand for betrayal. But on the question that mattered most to me, she had refused to give a name. Who chose me? I paid the bill and drove home through late afternoon traffic with Mom's phrases repeating in my head. I should have stopped it. Your father is very good at making a decision sound like something that simply happened. At home, I pulled out the copies from Grandma's files. Patricia's email, Kenneth's email, the green ledger. I laid them across the dining table. Then I opened the page with the line I had already read a dozen times. Kay says Lauren handled the paperwork. Says this will pass. Until that afternoon, I had been reading it as proof that Dad knew I was being blamed. Now I read the grammar differently. Kay says, not P says. Kay says Lauren handled the paperwork. I sat back slowly. It still wasn't proof. Grandma's shorthand could mean a dozen things. Dad could have been explaining why relatives were suspicious. He could have been describing an accusation somebody else had already made. But Mom's wording at the restaurant had shifted something. She had admitted taking the money. She had admitted benefiting Kayla. She had admitted helping Dad. She had admitted failing to stop the lie. Yet when I asked whether she had chosen me, she would not say yes. For 6 years, I had assumed the answer was obvious. Mom stole the money. Mom favored Kayla. Mom needed a scapegoat. Therefore, Mom chose me. That was the story I had carried because it was simple. But the documents were beginning to suggest a different sequence. Mom had taken the money. Dad had known. Dad had his own financial reason to keep it quiet. And somewhere between Grandma discovering the transfers and the first time my relatives started looking at me differently, someone noticed I was the easiest person in the family to blame. I looked again at Grandma's handwriting. Kay says Lauren handled the paperwork. For the first time, I stopped asking why my mother had chosen me. I started wondering whether she had. The next useful piece of evidence did not come from anything dramatic. No hidden recording. No confession written on the back of a photograph. It came from a timeline prepared by the successor trustee after she finished matching Grandma's bank statements to the dates in the green ledger. I appreciated that more than I would have appreciated a dramatic reveal, because by then I had learned how dangerous it was to let emotion outrun documentation. Miss Whitaker called me 4 days after my meeting with Mom. I have the chronology you asked about. I closed the spreadsheet on my computer and shut my office door. Does it show where the second set of transfers went? Not conclusively. That was exactly the kind of answer I trusted. What does it show? The transfers left Margaret's accounts in 3 separate transactions over approximately 2 weeks. Patricia was still acting under the financial power of attorney. I also compared the dates to the public satisfaction filing you identified. And the final transfer was completed 5 business days before Kenneth's judgment was marked satisfied. I looked at the notes already spread across my desk. That's close. It is, but not proof. No. I smiled despite myself. You sound like me. I hope that's a compliment. It is, she continued. There is one additional item in Margaret's files, an email from Kenneth dated shortly after the second group of transfers. I sat straighter. What does it say? I'll send you the copy you're authorized to receive, but the relevant sentence is, "Thank you for giving us time. I will make sure this is paid back." I didn't answer immediately. Miss Whitaker said, "Lauren? I'm here." That email does not identify which specific transfer he meant. I know, but it does make it difficult for him to maintain that he had no knowledge of Margaret's missing funds until much later. Exactly. That was the point. Dad's defense had been getting narrower every time a new document appeared. At lunch, he had said Mom made the financial decision. He had implied he discovered everything afterward. Then we found the old email showing he knew while the money issue was still active. Now, there was another message tying him directly to repayment language immediately after the second cluster of transfers. He could still argue about the source of the judgment payment. He could still say some business associate had helped him. He could still insist he never personally touched Grandma's accounts. But one door had closed. He had known. Early. I asked Miss Whitaker whether I could have a copy. I'm sending it now. My email chimed less than a minute later. I opened the attachment. Grandma? Thank you for giving us time. I know Patricia has put you in an impossible position. I will make sure this is paid back. Please don't involve Kayla or anyone else until we have a chance to straighten things out. Kenneth. I read it twice, then a third time. I know Patricia has put you in an impossible position. That line was pure, Dad. Even in a message where he promised repayment, he had positioned Mom as the person who created the problem. But he had written, I will make sure this is paid back. Not Patricia will. Not she will. I will. I printed the email and placed it beside the other one from 6 years earlier. The version of Dad who had sat across from me at lunch and said he found out later was becoming harder to locate anywhere outside his own mouth. Kayla called that evening. She had been doing exactly what I told her to do, handling her own part. I'm going to their house tomorrow, she said. I was standing at the stove stirring soup. Ethan glanced over from the counter, but didn't interrupt. Why? Because Mom keeps texting me like nothing happened. What kind of texts? Pictures of things, grocery stuff, a recipe. She asked whether I still had the necklace. I stopped stirring. What did you say? Nothing. Good. She called twice too. And you think going over there will help? I think I need to ask them what they thought I knew. I turned the burner down. That's a different question. I know. I heard the edge in her voice. What exactly are you planning to ask? Whether they ever thought about telling me where the money came from? Whether Dad knew? Why they let me say all those things about you? I was quiet. Then I said, don't go there looking for the answer you want. You say that like I'm you. No. I say it because you're angry. So are you. Yes. And you're still digging through every comma. Exactly. Kayla sighed. I'm not asking permission. I know. Then why does this sound like a performance review? Because you called me. That shut her up for a second. Then she said, fine, I'll go. I'll ask. I won't tell them what we have unless I need to. We? She corrected herself. What I have. Better. I hate when you do that. I know. She hung up without saying goodbye, which meant she was irritated but not done with me. The next evening she showed up at my house with no warning. I opened the door and knew immediately the conversation had gone badly. Kayla did not look angry. She looked stripped down. Not physically. Emotionally. Like someone had removed a structure she had been leaning against without realizing it. I stepped aside. Come in. She walked past me and went straight to the dining table. Ethan was upstairs on a work call. I brought Kayla water and sat across from her. She wrapped both hands around the glass without drinking. What happened? For a few seconds, she stared at the table. Then she said, Mom said everything she did was for the family. That sounds like Mom. I told her that wasn't an answer. I waited. Dad asked why I was suddenly taking your side. My expression must have changed because Kayla immediately added, I told him I wasn't taking your side. What did you say? I said I was trying to figure out what happened. I nodded. Good. Kayla swallowed. I asked them whether Dad knew when they paid my business debts. And Mom said yes. Dad said he knew she was helping me but didn't know every detail. That's consistent with what he told me. Then I asked whether he knew it was Grandma's money. She looked up. Dad didn't answer. Moan did? Yes. What did she say? She said, of course he knew. There was the same answer Mom had given me. Kayla rubbed one thumb against the side of the glass. Dad told her to stop making it sound worse than it was. What happened next? I asked about his judgment. Her mouth tightened. He got angry. Did he deny the judgment? No. He said I didn't understand adult finances. I almost smiled. Apparently that's his favorite line now. I told him I was 32, not 12. Good? He said the judgment had nothing to do with me. It doesn't. I know. I said that too. I said I wanted to know if Grandma's money paid it. And? Kayla looked at me. He never said no. That mattered emotionally. Factually, it still wasn't enough. I leaned back. What did he say instead? That Mom was the one who controlled Margaret's accounts. That she moved money. That if I wanted to know why transfers happened, I should ask her. I felt something cold and familiar settle in my chest. There it was again. Push Patricia forward. Step behind her, Kayla continued. Then Mom said, don't you dare act like I did this alone. I could hear her saying it. What did Dad do? He told her she was getting hysterical. I closed my eyes for half a second. Of course he did. What else? Mom said, "You knew exactly what was happening." Dad said, "I knew after you had already crossed the line." That was slightly different from his original version. Not much. Enough. Kayla watched me carefully. You're doing math in your head. Timeline. Same thing with you. I ignored that. What did you ask next? I asked why they let everyone blame you. She stopped. I waited. What did they say? Mom said the situation got out of control. And Dad? He said nobody forced you to cut the family off. I felt heat rise through me. Not surprise. Recognition. What exactly did he say? Kayla hesitated. Something like, Lauren made herself look guilty by disappearing every time anyone asked questions. I laughed once. I couldn't help it. That's impressive. What? He's using my reaction to being falsely accused as evidence that the accusation made sense. Kayla looked sick. I told him that. You did? Yes. What happened? He said I was letting you turn me against them. I sat back. There it was. The system trying to repair itself in real time. If Kayla questioned the parents, I had manipulated her. If I questioned the parents, I was cold. If Grandma questioned the transfers, she was stubborn. Everyone who resisted Patricia and Kenneth eventually received a character flaw to explain why their objection didn't count. Mom kept saying she did what she had to do, Kayla said. Dad kept saying she made the decisions. They weren't even defending the same story. No, they were defending themselves. Yes. Kayla finally took a drink of water. Then she looked at me. I believed them for so long. I didn't answer. I don't mean just about the money. I know. I mean the whole thing. I know. She looked irritated. Can you stop saying that like you knew I'd get here eventually? I didn't. That was the truth. She studied me. I thought you knew everything. Then you haven't been paying attention. That earned the smallest smile. It disappeared quickly. There's something else. She pulled out her phone. What? I asked Dad why he told people you knew what you did. My attention sharpened. What did he say? He denied it. I wasn't surprised. He told me he never accused you. Same thing he told me. I said I heard him. That surprised me. You heard him? Kayla nodded. Not every time. But once, at Uncle Ray's house, you had already left. Dad told Ray you were avoiding the family because you couldn't face what happened. I remembered the night. I had left early because Aunt Carol had moved her purse when I sat down beside her. I had always suspected something had been said after. Now I knew. What did Dad say when you reminded him? That I was remembering it wrong. I smiled without humor. Convenient. Mom didn't defend him. No? No, she just sat there. That's different from denying it. Exactly. Kayla leaned forward. Lauren, he did accuse you. I know. You've been saying he did, but I thought maybe what? She looked embarrassed. Maybe some of it got worse in your head because you were angry. I stared at her. Kayla immediately looked away. That was honest, she said. It was. And awful. Yes. She rubbed her forehead. I'm sorry. I let the apology sit. Not because I wanted to punish her. Because I wanted her to feel the actual weight of saying it. Then I said, "Thank you." She looked relieved enough that I almost regretted answering so quickly. Almost. I took out Dad's newest email and slid it across the table. What's this? Something Miss Whitaker sent today. Kayla read it. When she reached, I will make sure this is paid back. She looked up. He knew. Yes. And this was before the family blamed you? Yes. So why are we still pretending this is unclear? Because knowing about the money and deciding to blame me are two separate facts. She dropped the paper onto the table. You really need everything labeled. Yes. Why? Because 6 years ago nobody did. That silenced her. I tapped the email. This proves Dad knew there was money to repay. It strengthens the timeline. It makes his "I found out later" story weaker. It does not prove he received the $21,000. Kayla pointed toward my laptop. The judgment. Matches. Mom admitted Dad had a judgment problem. Yes. She admitted he knew. Yes. Grandma's transfers happened before the judgment was satisfied. Yes. How much more do you need? Enough that when I say it, I know I'm not doing what they did to me. Kayla looked at me for a long time. Then she sat back. Okay. That was one of the hardest changes between us. Kayla had always treated certainty like a feeling. If something seemed obvious, she believed she knew it. I had learned the opposite. Sometimes the thing that felt obvious was true. That did not mean the path to proving it could be skipped. 2 days later, Dad called me again. I was at work. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I answered. Lorraine. Dad, I heard Kayla came to see you. I leaned back in my chair. She did. You're filling her head with things. No. She came into our house accusing us. That sounds like something to discuss with Kayla. You started this. No. You started it 6 years ago. His voice dropped. Your mother moved Margaret's money. There it was again. Not we. Your mother. You've said that. Then why are you acting like I was the one controlling her accounts? I'm not. You keep asking about my judgment. Because the amount and dates overlap. That does not make it Margaret's money. I know. He paused. That answer had not been the one he wanted. What? I said I know. Then what are we doing? Finding out whether the overlap is coincidence. It is. Okay. You don't believe me. I don't have enough information to. His breathing changed. You have decided I'm guilty. No, you seem very determined to make me say that. I'm tired of being treated like some criminal because your mother made an emotional decision. I closed my eyes. You keep using that phrase. What phrase? Your mother. She moved the money. You knew. Latter. I have another email. Silence. That was the first time I heard something like fear on the other end. What email? The one where you told Grandma, I will make sure this is paid back. Dad said nothing. I let him sit with it. Finally he said, that proves nothing. It proves you knew there was something to pay back. I already told you I knew your mother had moved money. You told me you found out after. I did. After which transfer? He didn't answer. Dad? You're playing games with dates. No. Dates don't play games. He exhaled hard. I am not going to reconstruct 6 years ago minute by minute. You don't need to. Then stop. No. His voice sharpened. Lorraine, no. It was strange how good that word felt when it wasn't angry. Just complete. Dad changed tactics. That judgment was paid with help from a business associate. You told me. I'm telling you again because apparently you think repetition only counts when we do it. Who was the associate? That is none of your business. It becomes relevant if you're asking me to ignore a matching transfer. I'm not asking you to ignore anything. You offered to clear my name if I stopped involving the trustee. That is not what I offered. It was. He went quiet. Then he said, this family cannot survive if every private mistake becomes evidence. I looked at the papers on my desk. Maybe it shouldn't survive in the same form. There was a long silence. When Dad spoke again, his voice was colder. Your mother dragged me into this. I sat up. What does that mean? It means she made a decision and expected everyone else to absorb the consequences. I almost laughed at the lack of self-awareness. Everyone else? Yes. Like me? That's not what I meant. It's what happened. Lauren, I'm done having this conversation if you are going to twist every word. New problem. I was about to hang up when he said, and for the record, I never told anyone you stole from Margaret. I stopped. You want to put that on the record? Don't be cute. I'm not. I never told anyone you stole money. At Aunt Carol's Christmas dinner, you told Uncle Ray I knew exactly what I'd done. That is not the same sentence. At Grandma's after Easter, you told me I couldn't expect the family to trust me until I made things right. You were refusing to discuss the situation. At Ray's house, you said I was avoiding everyone because I couldn't face what happened. Silence. I waited. Who told you that? The question answered more than a denial would have. You did say it. I asked who told you. Kayla heard you. Dad swore under his breath. Then he said something so familiar I could almost have predicted it. Your sister does not remember things accurately when she's upset. I smiled. First I had been cold. Grandma had been stubborn. Mom was emotional. Now Kayla was unreliable. Every inconvenient witness got a defect. Goodbye, Dad. Lorraine. I hung up. For a few seconds I sat there staring at my phone. Then I opened my notes. Dad's story had changed again. Patricia made the decision. He knew later. He knew some money was moved. He promised repayment. He denied accusing me. Then, when I named a specific accusation Kayla had heard, he asked who told me. Not what are you talking about? Not that never happened. Who told you? The pattern was becoming more interesting than any single document. Dad didn't usually tell lies that had to survive inspection. He told lies designed to get through the current conversation. If no one checked the next version against the previous one, they worked beautifully. That evening, Ethan found me at the dining table again. You're spending a lot of time here lately. I'm considering charging the family an hourly rate. That would be fair. I showed him the new email and told him about Dad's call. Ethan read silently. Then he said, "Do you think the judgment was paid with Margaret's money?" "Yes." He looked up. That answer surprised him. "You said yes." "I think it was. But I still can't prove source." He nodded. "And do you think your dad blamed you?" "Yes." Another pause. "You sound more certain about that." "I remember what he said." Kayla remembers what he said. We have messages showing he reinforced the story. Grandma's ledger has that line about me handling paperwork. Kay says Lauren handled the paperwork. Yes. And you still don't know exactly what he meant when he said it? No. Ethan leaned back. So what changed? My father. What about him? I looked down at my notes. He keeps doing the same thing. Blaming Patricia? Moving the cost. Ethan waited. I thought about my childhood. Not in dramatic scenes, but in small patterns I had almost forgotten because they had once seemed normal. If Mom overcommitted us to something, Dad told us not to upset her. If Kayla caused a problem at school, Dad said I was older and should help keep the peace. If Grandma argued with Mom, Dad said everybody needed to stop provoking each other. He rarely caused the original explosion. He simply decided who should absorb the damage. Usually the person least likely to create another explosion. I used to think Dad was passive, I said. Mom acted. Dad stayed calm. And now? I think staying calm was how he made his decisions look neutral. Ethan nodded slowly. When somebody had to pay a price, he picked the person he thought could carry it. Like you. I looked at him. Yes. The thought sat there. 6 years earlier, Kayla was already falling apart over her business. Mom was terrified of being exposed. Dad had a judgment hanging over him. Grandma was furious. And then there was me, 32 years old. Stable job. No children. No financial crisis. Already willing to walk away from family conflict instead of screaming through it. If Dad needed a person who could be hurt without becoming another emergency, I fit perfectly. The idea made more sense than I wanted it to. But it was still an idea. I closed my notebook. I need to know who said my name first. Ethan looked toward the green ledger copy. You think it was him? Yes. And if it wasn't? I changed my mind. That was the answer I needed to be able to give. Not because Dad deserved fairness, because I did. The next morning, I sent Kayla one message. Do not confront them again yet. Save every old text you can find from the months when the accusation started. She responded within a minute. Looking now. Then a second message came. You think Dad started it, don't you? I typed carefully. I think Dad was more involved than either of us understood. Her reply took longer. Then, that is not the same answer. I smiled. She was learning. No, I wrote, it isn't. I spent the rest of that morning working. But the sentence Dad had used on the phone followed me through every meeting. Your mother dragged me into this. It was such a revealing way to describe his own life. Nothing was ever something Kenneth Bennett chose if another person could be blamed for creating the circumstances. Mom dragged him into the money. Grandma dragged him into conflict by refusing to let it go. I dragged him into an estate dispute by asking questions. Kayla was being turned against him because I filled her head with things. The structure was always the same. He was never the source, only the man forced to react. By lunch, I understood something I should have recognized years earlier. My father wasn't trying to prove he was innocent. He was trying to decide who he could make guilty instead. Mom waited less than 24 hours before calling me again. By then, I had stopped being surprised by how quickly my parents reacted whenever one of them thought the other was getting ahead of the story. Dad had spent 6 years presenting himself as the reasonable person trapped between difficult women. Now that the records were making that position harder to maintain, Mom had apparently decided she was done letting him stand behind her. "I need you to listen before you decide I'm trying to manipulate you," she said. I was in my car outside work, eating half a sandwich between meetings. "That opening is getting popular in this family. Lauren, I'm listening. Your father knew from the first transfer. You've said that." "No, you keep treating that like it means he learned what I did and failed to stop me. That is not what happened." I put the sandwich down. "Then tell me what happened." Mom was quiet for several seconds. I could hear a television somewhere behind her. "After your grandmother confronted us, Kenneth wanted to know who else knew." "Why?" "Because he was afraid she would tell people." "That makes sense. He said you had been helping her with bills and paperwork." My hand tightened around the phone. "Okay." He said if questions started, people would assume you had seen the account information. There it was again. The same idea Grandma had compressed into one line in the green ledger. "Kay says Lauren handled the paperwork." I kept my voice even. "Did Dad say I took the money?" "Not exactly." "What did he say exactly?" "I don't remember every word." "You remember enough to call me." Mom exhaled sharply. "He said people already thought you kept things from the family. He said you were the one person who could have known what was in Margaret's accounts without anyone finding it strange." "That still isn't the same as saying, 'Let's blame Lauren.'" "No, it isn't." The answer surprised me. Mom continued before I could. "But that's where it started." I stared through the windshield at the gray parking lot. "Are you telling me Dad chose me?" "I'm telling you, he was the first person who said your name when we were talking about what people would think." That's a very specific distinction. Because I'm not going to let him turn this into a story where I made every bad decision and he just stood next to me. I leaned back against the seat. There it was. Not remorse. Survival. Mom was giving me truth because Dad's version threatened her. That didn't make the truth useless. It just told me how carefully to handle it. "Did you object?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. "Mom?" "I said you were our daughter. That isn't the same as objecting." "I know. What happened after that?" "Kenneth said you were strong." I closed my eyes. Of all the things she could have said, that one hit hardest because it sounded exactly like him. "What else?" "He said you had your own life. You were already pulling away. He said if people thought something bad about you, you would be angry, but you would survive it." My throat tightened. I had spent years wondering whether my parents saw me as difficult, selfish, ungrateful, cold. I had never considered the possibility that one of the reasons I had been useful to them was the opposite. They thought I was durable. That did not make what they did kinder. It made it colder. "Did he say those exact words?" I asked. "Close enough." "Close enough isn't exact." "Oh, for God's sake, Lauren." "No, if this matters, it matters correctly." Mom went quiet. Then she said, "He said, Lauren will be fine. She always is." I wrote it down on the back of an envelope from my glove compartment. "Lauren will be fine. She always is." I hated how ordinary it sounded. No villain speech. No declaration that I deserved pain. Just an assumption that if someone had to absorb the damage, I was the safest choice. Did Dad tell relatives I took the money? He told people you had access. That's not what I asked. He let them reach the conclusion. "And you?" I didn't correct them. "Did you reinforce it?" Mom hesitated. "Yes. At least she said it." I looked at the notes in my lap. "So both of you knew I was innocent?" "Yes. Dad was the first person to point out I was a believable suspect." "Yes. And you went along with it?" "Yes." For the first time, Mom's voice sounded smaller. Then she ruined it. "But if Kenneth is telling you this was all me, you need to understand what kind of man you're dealing with." I almost laughed. "You still think I need help understanding either of you?" "I'm trying to warn you." "No, you're trying to recruit me." "That's not fair." "It's accurate. I'm your mother. And he's my father." "That has not been a useful argument so far." She went silent. I continued. "I'm not taking your side because Dad is trying to abandon you. I'm not taking his side because you moved the money. I'm going to find out what happened. You already know what happened. I know pieces. You know enough. That seems to be everyone's favorite phrase when the next fact gets uncomfortable. Mom's voice sharpened. He was the one who said your name first. And you were the one who used Grandma's money. You see? No, Mom, that's what happened. I let the words settle before I added. If Dad suggested using me, that makes what he did worse. It does not make what you did smaller. She had nothing to say to that. When the call ended, I sat in my car another 5 minutes before going back inside. Not because I was shaken enough to miss work, because I wanted to separate what I knew from what Mom wanted me to believe. Her account matched Grandma's ledger. It matched Dad's habit of turning other people into buffers. It matched his old comments about my access to paperwork. But Mom had a reason to blame him now. That meant I needed something independent. Kayla found it 2 days later. She called me just after 9 on a Sunday morning. I found an old backup. I was pouring coffee. What kind? Messages. From my old phone. I set the pot down. From 2020? Yes. Don't summarize. Read it. She was quiet while she scrolled. Dad sent this in June. Right around when everyone started acting weird with you. What does it say? Kayla read slowly. Do not discuss Grandma's accounts with Lauren. She is defensive. Because she knows what she did. Your mother and I are handling it. I felt the room narrow around me. Send me a screenshot with the date visible. I already did. My phone buzzed. I opened the image. There it was. Kenneth Bennett. Timestamp. The sentence. No interpretation required. It did not prove Dad invented the accusation, but it destroyed another piece of his defense. He had told me he never accused me. He had told Kayla I was defensive because I knew what I had done. I stared at the screenshot until the words became shapes. Kayla spoke again. There are more. What kind? Mostly him telling me not to ask you anything. Saying you were trying to create distance because you didn't want to answer questions. Send everything. I will. Then she hesitated. Lauren, what? I believed him. I know. No, I mean I really believed him. I read this now and it's so obvious what he was doing, but then I thought he was protecting me from you. I sat at the kitchen table. Because that's what he told you. Yes. That explains it. It doesn't erase it. I know. She paused. I'm trying not to say that automatically anymore. I almost smiled. Good. Kayla sent 8 screenshots over the next 10 minutes. None were as direct as the first. Dad told her not to discuss Grandma's finances with me. He described me as angry, defensive, unpredictable. He said my withdrawal from family events was telling. What struck me most was what wasn't there. No evidence, no bank record, no explanation of how I supposedly moved money. Just character. I was defensive, therefore suspicious. I withdrew, therefore guilty. I refused to apologize, therefore untrustworthy. They had never needed to prove an act. They had only needed to describe me in a way that made the act feel plausible. I printed the screenshots and placed them beside Grandma's ledger copy. Kay says Lauren handled the paperwork, says this will pass. Now the sentence looked less ambiguous. Still not a confession. Still not enough to say Dad had sat at a table and announced, let's frame Lauren, but enough to show that when the rumor existed, he actively shaped it. I thought about calling Mom. I didn't. There was nothing useful left to gain from watching them compete to tell me which one was worse. That afternoon, Dad solved the problem for me by showing up at my house. Ethan saw him through the front window and looked at me. Do you want me here? Yes. Do you want me in the room? No. Got it. He went upstairs but stayed home. I opened the door without inviting Dad farther than the entryway. He held a folder. I think we can resolve this. Those words have never made me feel better. Dad ignored that. I drafted something. He handed me the folder. Inside was a 1-page statement. I scanned it. It said that after reviewing old family financial records, Kenneth Bennett wanted to clarify that Lauren Bennett had not taken funds from Margaret Bennett, and that previous assumptions about Lauren's involvement had been incorrect. No mention of who made those assumptions. No mention that Dad had repeated them. No mention of Mom. No mention of 6 years of knowing I was innocent. Still, I read it twice. Then I looked up. You're willing to sign this? Yes. And send it to the family? Yes. Why now? Because this has gone too far. I almost admired his consistency. When did it go too far? Lauren. When Mom moved the money? When you knew? When relatives stopped inviting me? When you told Kayla I was defensive because I knew what I did? Or when the trustee started looking at records? His expression changed at the mention of Kayla's message. What did she show you? I did not answer. Dad's eyes narrowed. She has no context. I didn't tell you what she showed me. You just quoted something. I watched him realize it. That was happening more often now. The gap between one version and the next was getting smaller, and he had less room to move. He lifted the statement. This clears you. No. The truth clears me. This states the truth. Part of it. What else do you want? There it is again. What? You offering me my own name like it belongs to you. His mouth tightened. I am trying to correct the damage. Then send it. He stared at me. No condition. He looked down at the folder. I waited. Finally, he said, I need you to tell the trustee there is no reason to continue escalating this. I laughed then. Not loudly. Just enough. Dad's face hardened. What is funny? The fact that you did the exact same thing twice and expected me not to notice. I don't know what you mean. At lunch you offered to clear my name if I stopped involving the trustee. Now you brought a written statement and attached the same condition. I am asking for common sense. No, you are bartering. This could turn into expensive litigation for everyone. That isn't my decision. You are driving it. The trustee is reviewing Grandma's money. Because you keep feeding her information. I stepped closer. Dad, if the records show nothing improper, then why are you afraid of accounting? His expression went flat. I'm not afraid. Then sign the statement and send it. I will. Without conditions. He said nothing. I handed the folder back. You can keep it until it becomes an apology instead of a transaction. His face flushed. You think you have all the leverage now? No. I think you still don't understand what I want. What do you want? To never have this conversation again because the facts are finally settled. He shook his head. You're going to destroy this family to make a point. No. I'm going to stop protecting it from the truth. For a moment, we simply looked at each other. Then Dad said, Your mother is telling you I came up with this whole idea, isn't she? I didn't respond. That's what she's doing. Interesting. She is terrified the trustee will hold her responsible, so now suddenly every decision was mine. Did you say people would believe I took the money because I handled Grandma's paperwork? His jaw tightened. Did she tell you that? Did you? It was a conversation 6 years ago. That isn't a denial. I may have said people would ask questions. Did you tell Mom I would be fine? His face changed. Very slightly. That was enough. Dad looked toward the stairs, then back at me. You don't understand what things were like then. I understand everyone else had a crisis. That is not what I mean. Kayla was drowning. Mom was panicking. You had a judgment. Grandma was furious. He stared at me. And I was fine. Dad said nothing. I felt the answer before I heard one. You thought I could absorb it. That's not what happened. You thought I'd get angry. Leave. Build my own life. And survive. Lauren, you are putting words in my mouth. Then give me better ones. He couldn't. He picked up the folder. This conversation is over. New problem. When he reached the door, I said, Send the statement if you mean it. He did not turn around. After he left, Ethan came downstairs. You okay? Yes. Do you want to tell me what happened? I handed him the unsigned statement. He read it. Conditional? Of course. He put the paper down. He really thinks clearing your name is something he can trade. Yes. Ethan looked at me. And you're not taking the deal? No. Good. I glanced toward the door. For 6 years, I thought what I wanted was for him to say I didn't do it. And now? I want him to understand he never had the right to make me earn that sentence. The next morning, I called Miss Whitaker. I think we need everyone in one room. She was quiet for a moment. For purposes of the accounting? Yes. Who is everyone? My parents. Kayla, me, you. I want to be clear about my role. I know, you're not mediating the family. Correct. You're presenting what the trust records show and asking questions about the transfers. Yes, that's all I need. She agreed to propose dates. Then I called Kayla. You still have the necklace? Yes, locked up. Good. What's happening? We're going to have a meeting. With Mom and Dad? Yes. And Miss Whitaker? Yes. Kayla went silent. You think they'll come? I think each of them believes the other one is more dangerous than the records. That's dark. It's practical. When? Probably next week. Kayla hesitated. What are you trying to get them to admit? Nothing. That sounds like a lie. It isn't. Then what's the point? To put one timeline in front of both of them. And let them decide what version they want to defend. Kayla was quiet again. Then she said, what if they both lie? I looked at the papers spread across my dining table. Mom's email, Dad's email, Kayla's business records, the public judgment, the satisfaction date, Grandma's ledger, Dad's old message telling Kayla I was defensive because I knew what I had done, a statement offering to clear my name in exchange for silence. They still had room to argue about details. They still had room to blame each other. What they did not have anymore was the luxury of telling separate stories to separate people. Then for the first time, I said, they'll have to lie in front of each other. The meeting took place in a conference room at the same law firm where I had first seen Grandma's green ledger. Miss Whitaker sat at the head of the table with a legal pad, a thin binder, and none of the emotional investment the rest of us carried into that room. I wanted her there for exactly that reason. She was not there to decide who had been a good mother, a loyal husband, or a terrible daughter. She was there because Grandma's money had left Grandma's accounts, and the trust had a legitimate reason to ask why. Kayla arrived first. She sat beside me but left an empty chair between us. I appreciated that. We were working toward the same truth, but neither of us was pretending we had repaired 6 years in a few weeks. Mom came in next, wearing a cream coat and carrying herself like she was entering a meeting she had already decided was unfair. Dad arrived last. He shook Miss Whitaker's hand, nodded to Kayla, and looked at me only after he sat down. Miss Whitaker opened the binder. I want to be clear before we begin. I am not mediating family relationships. I am reviewing transactions involving Margaret Bennett's assets and documenting relevant explanations. If anyone prefers to respond later through counsel, that is your right. Dad leaned back. That sounds unnecessarily formal. It is an accounting matter involving more than $50,000. Mom glanced at him. I noticed, Miss Whitaker continued. The records show that Patricia Bennett held financial power of attorney during Margaret's recovery in 2020. During that period, $52,600 left Margaret's accounts in several transactions. Dad immediately said, Patricia controlled those accounts. Mom turned toward him. He didn't look at her. There it was, 30 seconds into the meeting. Miss Whitaker did not react. Approximately $31,400 corresponds in timing and amount to payments associated with Kayla Bennett's former business. Kayla nodded. I provided those records. Thank you. The remaining approximately $21,200 left Margaret's accounts in a second cluster of transactions. Public court records show a civil judgment against Kenneth Bennett in a nearly identical amount was marked satisfied several days after that cluster. Dad's expression did not change. That proves nothing about where the judgment payment came from. I did not say it did. He glanced at me. I kept my hands folded on the table. Miss Whitaker turned a page. We also have an email from Kenneth to Margaret written during that period stating, I will make sure this is paid back. Dad shook his head. I was referring generally to what Patricia had done. Mom gave a short laugh. Dad looked at her. What? You really are going to do this? He frowned. Do what? Sit there and talk like I broke into Margaret's house in the middle of the night while you were asleep somewhere. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Miss Whitaker held up one hand. I need one person at a time. Mom ignored her. You knew where the money came from. Dad turned toward her. I knew after you had already crossed the line. That is a lie. Patricia. No. You've been telling Lauren for weeks that I did this and you found out afterward. I did find out afterward. After what? Dad's jaw tightened. Mom leaned forward. After the first transfer? After the second? After your judgment disappeared? Do not make this about my judgment, Kayla said. It is about your judgment. Dad looked at her. You don't understand the financial situation. Kayla's face hardened. Stop saying that. Dad blinked. I'm 32. I understand that Grandma's money left her account, and your debt disappeared. That is not the same thing. No, I said. It isn't. Everyone looked at me. Dad seemed almost relieved. I continued. Which is why nobody has said the public filing proves source. It proves timing. The emails prove knowledge. Mom's admission proves there were 2 separate rescues. Dad looked at Mom. What admission? Mom's eyes narrowed. Don't. He turned fully toward her. What did you tell her? I told her the truth. The truth according to you. Mom laughed again, sharper this time. That's rich. Miss Whitaker placed her pen down. Patricia, for the accounting record, did you authorize or initiate the transfers from Margaret's accounts? Mom looked at her. Yes. Dad exhaled through his nose. Mom heard it. Her face changed. And did some of the money benefit Kayla? Miss Whitaker asked. Yes. Did some of the money relate to Kenneth's financial obligation? Mom looked directly at Dad. Yes. He spoke immediately. She made those decisions. Mom stared at him. Dad continued. I am not denying that I knew there was a problem. I am denying that I controlled Margaret's accounts. Patricia was the attorney. In fact, she moved the funds. The room went very still. I had known he was preparing to do this. Still, watching it happen felt different. Mom slowly turned toward him. So that's it? What? You're leaving it all with me. I'm stating facts. You knew. I've said I knew later. You knew before the second transfer. Dad's voice sharpened. Because you told me what you had already done. And then you told me we could replace it before Margaret did anything. That is not the same as telling you to take more. You needed the money. I had other options. Mom looked at him like she could not believe what she was hearing. What options? That is not relevant. Your friend? The mysterious business associate you suddenly remembered 6 years later? Dad's face reddened. Be careful. Mom sat back. Then something in her expression settled. I recognized it because I had seen the same shift in myself during difficult negotiations at work. The moment someone stopped trying to preserve the relationship and started preserving the record. You want careful? She said. Fine. Dad stared at her. Mom looked at Miss Whitaker. He knew about the money. He knew about both transfers. And when Margaret started asking what would happen if the rest of the family found out, Kenneth was the one who said Lauren's name. Nobody moved. Even though Mom had told me privately, hearing it in that room felt different. Dad's head snapped toward her. That is not what happened. Yes, it is. You are twisting a conversation. You said she handled Margaret's paperwork. Dad shook his head. Mom continued. You said people would believe she had access. I said people already knew she helped with bills. You said that made her believable. I did not say to blame her. You said, Lauren will be fine. She always is. Dad stared at her. Kayla's breathing changed beside me. Mom's voice was no longer loud. That made it worse. I told you she was our daughter. You said she already kept herself separate. You said she would get angry, walk away, and survive it. Dad's face had gone pale. That is not what I said. Mom leaned back. What did you say? He looked around the table. For the first time since I could remember, my father did not have a smooth answer ready. Then he made the mistake that ended it. I said people already thought Lauren kept things from us. I said no one would question why she might need money. That is not the same as saying we should blame her. No one spoke. Dad realized what he had done almost immediately. He had spent weeks denying he participated in shaping the accusation. Now, while trying to correct Mom, he had confirmed the core of it. He had assessed me. My reputation. My distance from the family. My financial independence. The way relatives perceived me. And he had decided I was plausible enough. Miss Whitaker wrote something on her pad. Dad looked at her. What are you writing? A summary of statements made in this meeting. I'm not admitting wrongdoing. I did not say you were. This conversation is being taken out of context. Mom laughed once more. You keep saying context like it changes the words. Dad turned on her. And you keep acting like you had no agency. You were the one with access. You moved the money. I never said I didn't. You told Lauren I chose her. You did. You went along with it. Yes. Mom's answer stopped him. She looked at me. I went along with it. Her voice was quieter now. That part is mine. I didn't thank her. I didn't need a partial confession to become a redemption scene. Dad looked at me next. Lauren, you know your mother. Once she decides she is saving someone, there is no reasoning with her. I felt something inside me become very clear. Even now, after everything, he was trying to hand me a new role. Witness against Mom. The reasonable daughter. The one who would agree that Patricia was difficult and help him escape through the space between us. No, I said. Dad stopped. You don't get to use me against her now. You already used me once. He stared at me. I'm not using you. Yes, you are. I'm explaining what happened. No, you're explaining why her choices should cost you less. Mom looked down at the table. Dad's face hardened. So what do you want me to say? I don't want you to say anything for me. Then why are we here? Because Grandma's money needs an accounting. That's not what I mean. I know. Dad looked toward Kayla. This started because your mother was trying to keep you from losing everything. Kayla flinched. Mom immediately said, Kenneth? But he kept going. She was terrified about what would happen to you. If Patricia had not stepped in, your business would have collapsed completely. Kayla's face went very still. It did collapse. You know what I mean. You paid the worst debts. We protected you. Mom said, we did. Kayla looked at both of them. For years that sentence would have worked. We protected you. It had been the foundation of her place in the family. Mom and Dad were squed. Kayla needed them. I did not. Therefore, Kayla was loving and connected, while I was distant and difficult. Kayla placed both palms flat on the table. No. Mom frowned. No what? You didn't do all of this for me. Patricia's face changed. Kayla, you used me to justify what you wanted to do. That is not true. You took Grandma's money because you decided I shouldn't have to fail. I was your mother. You still are. You were drowning. I made bad business decisions. You were 26. So? Mom stared at her. Kayla's voice began to shake, but she kept going. If the business failed, then I should have lost it. Mom looked horrified. Don't say that. Why? Because no mother would stand there and let that happen. Grandma would have. Margaret wanted to punish you. No, she wanted me to deal with what I had done. Mom shook her head. You don't mean that. I do. Dad tried to step in. Kayla, nobody is saying you caused this. She turned toward him. You made Lauren pay for it? Dad went silent. Kayla swallowed. I didn't know where the money came from. But after that, when you told me Lauren took Grandma's money, I believed you. I repeated it. I used it against her. Mom reached toward her. Kayla pulled her hand away. No. Mom froze. I'm not doing this anymore. Doing what? Being the reason. Mom looked genuinely confused. The reason for what? The reason you're allowed to do anything. Kayla's voice steadied. You helped me, so stealing became love. I needed you. So Lauren was selfish because she didn't. You protected me, so somebody else had to be bad enough to make you look good. That is not fair. Kayla looked at her. No, it wasn't. That ended something. I could feel it. Not the relationship between them. That would take longer. But the structure, golden child, scapegoat, the daughter who needed saving, and the daughter who could survive being sacrificed. For the first time, neither of us was accepting the role. Miss Whitaker closed the binder. I think we have enough for today. Dad looked at her. Enough for what? For me to continue the accounting review and advise counsel regarding the trust's options. This is becoming absurd. No, I said. It's becoming documented. He looked at me. I stood. Mom said my name. I picked up my bag. I'm not doing another round today. Lauren, we need to talk privately. No. Please. No. Dad pushed his chair back. So you're just walking away? I looked at him. 6 years earlier, those words would have worked too. Lauren walks away. Lauren avoids conflict. Lauren cannot face what she did. This time, I knew exactly what I was leaving and why. Yes, I said. Because the facts stay in the room even when I don't. Kayla stood a second later. We walked out together. Neither of us spoke in the elevator. Outside, the March air was cold enough to sting my face. We crossed the parking lot toward our cars, and I could hear Kayla breathing too fast beside me. Halfway there, she stopped. I turned. She was staring at the pavement. I repeated it too. I waited. She looked up. The things they said about you. I repeated them. Yes? The word hurt her. I could see that, but I wasn't going to save her from it. I told people you stole from Grandma. I said you were jealous. I said you acted like you were too good for us. I know. I didn't know the truth about the money. No, but I knew I hadn't seen proof. I said nothing. She wiped at one eye angrily. I liked being the daughter who wasn't you. That was probably the most honest thing she had ever said to me. I nodded once. Yes. Kayla looked toward the building we had just left. Then back at me. Will you let me fix that part? I could have told her yes. I could have given her a list. Call these people. Write this email. Say these words. That was exactly what the old version of me would have done. Instead, I opened my car door. That part is yours. She looked confused. What does that mean? It means if you're going to correct it, you decide how. I'm not writing your apology for you. Her face tightened, then relaxed. Okay. I got into my car. Before closing the door, I looked at her. Just don't say anything you can't prove. For the first time in weeks, Kayla almost smiled. Then she nodded. I learned that from you. I drove home without calling Ethan. Without calling Mom. Without replaying the meeting out loud to anyone. For 6 years, I had thought the most important sentence I would ever hear was someone finally saying I had not stolen Grandma's money. I had been wrong. The sentence that mattered was much uglier. Lauren will be fine. She always is. My father had not chosen me because he believed I was guilty. He had chosen me because he believed I could survive being treated like I was. Kayla did not call me the next day, or the day after that. For the first time since the wedding, I did not wonder whether the silence meant she had changed her mind. I had told her the part she needed to fix was hers, and if I checked on her every 12 hours, corrected her wording, or decided what accountability should look like, I would simply be replacing one kind of family control with another. On the third evening, an email appeared in my inbox with the subject line, "Before I send this." I stared at it for a few seconds before opening it. Kayla had written to 14 relatives. Not Facebook, not Instagram, not every person who had ever attended one of our family gatherings. 14 people. They were the people she could specifically remember hearing the accusation from her, Mom, Dad, or some combination of the three of them. At the top of the email, she had written, "I need to correct something I repeated about Lauren for years. Lauren did not take Grandma Margaret's money." I kept reading. Kayla explained that while Grandma was recovering, Mom had moved money from Grandma's accounts. She wrote that some of it had paid debts connected to North Star events, and that she had believed at the time the money came from our parents' emergency savings. Then she wrote, "Dad knew Lauren was innocent." I also repeated things about Lauren without ever seeing proof that she had taken anything. I was wrong to do that. Not knowing where the money came from does not excuse what I said afterward. I stopped there. That sentence sounded like Kayla, not me. That mattered. The last paragraph was shorter. "I am sending this because I helped spread something that was false. I am not asking anyone to take sides. I am asking you not to repeat the story anymore as if it were true." Underneath the draft, Kayla had written one line to me. "Anything inaccurate?" I read the entire email again. There were things I might have worded differently. I would have been more precise about Dad's role. I would have distinguished between what the documents established and what Mom had admitted. I would have cut 2 sentences because they sounded defensive. "I did none of that," I replied. "Don't say anything you can't prove. Everything factual here matches what we have." Her answer came a minute later. "That's it?" I smiled. "That's it." Then I put my phone down. 20 minutes later, she sent the email. I knew because Aunt Carol called me almost immediately. I was sitting on the couch beside Ethan, watching a show neither of us had been paying much attention to. I saw Carol's name and considered ignoring it. Then I answered, "Hey, Lauren." Her voice sounded different from the last time we spoke. Less careful. "I got Kayla's email." I figured. "I didn't know." I looked toward the muted television. "Which part?" "That your father knew." "Okay. And that Kayla didn't know where the money came from." "Neither did I until recently." Carol was quiet. Then she said, "I owe you an apology." That sentence landed differently than I expected. For years, I had imagined apologies from certain people as if they would arrive with a physical sensation, relief, vindication, something unlocking. Instead, I felt cautious. "What are you apologizing for?" Carol exhaled. "For believing something about you because your parents said it." "That was better than 'I'm sorry you were hurt,'" she continued. "I never saw a bank record. I never asked Margaret directly. I just thought, your father sounded so certain." There it was. The part people rarely admitted. Certainty had replaced evidence. "I also moved my purse that night," she said. I had not expected her to bring that up. "At your house." "I know. I remember your face. I remember yours too." "I am sorry." I closed my eyes for a second. "Thank you. I should have asked you." "Yes. I should have asked Margaret." "Yes." Carol gave a shaky laugh. "You're not going to make this easy for me, are you?" "I'm not trying to make it hard." "No, I know." She paused. "I just thought maybe you'd say it's okay." "It isn't okay." Another pause. "But I appreciate the apology." That was enough. Not absolution. Not punishment. An accurate response. After Carol hung up, Ethan looked at me. "How was that?" "Better than the last call." "Good apology?" "Real enough." He turned the television sound back on. Within the next 48 hours, I received 9 messages. 3 people apologized directly. 2 said they had always wondered whether there was more to the story, which irritated me because none of them had wondered loudly enough to ask me. One cousin said she was shocked and hoped the family could heal. Another relative wrote an entire paragraph explaining that he had only believed what multiple people told him, as if repetition had somehow made him less responsible rather than more. Aunt Diane sent, "I'm sorry for the things I assumed. I should have come to you directly." That one I answered, "Thank you." Then Uncle Ray called and somehow managed to turn his apology into a defense of himself within 2 minutes. "We were getting information from your parents, Lauren. It wasn't like people invented this out of nowhere." "I know. You can understand why we believed them. I understand how it happened. That's what I mean. That isn't the same as saying it was reasonable." He went quiet. I waited. Finally he said, "I guess that's fair." It was more than I expected. The messages I did not answer were the ones telling me to let it go now that the truth was out. As if correcting the lie created a deadline for my feelings. As if everyone else's discomfort could finally be over because the record had been updated. I had no interest in arguing with them. That was another thing I had learned. Not every wrong interpretation needed my labor. Kayla called that Friday. "I think I hate email. Welcome to professional adulthood. I have gotten 11 responses. I got several too." Carol called me. "What did she say?" "That she feels awful." "She should?" Kayla was quiet. Then she said, "Some people are being nice. Good. Some are acting like mom and dad hypnotized them." That sounds about right. I don't know what to say to those. "You don't have to say anything." I thought accountability meant answering. "No, accountability means owning what you did. It doesn't mean volunteering for every conversation people want to have about it." She was silent for a moment. "That sounds like something you learned the hard way." "It is." Kayla sighed. "Mom called me." I sat straighter. "What did she want?" "She said I humiliated them." "By correcting something false?" "She said I made private family issues public." "You emailed 14 relatives who had already heard the private family issue." I told her that. "And?" "She said I was becoming like you." I almost laughed. "Congratulations." Kayla did laugh then. It was small, but it was real. The first laugh between us that did not feel like it belonged to the years before everything went wrong. Then she said, "I told her I hope so." That stopped me. "You did?" I was angry. "Still, I meant some of it." I didn't know what to say to that, so I chose honesty. Don't turn me into the new good daughter. I know. I mean it, Kayla. I know. Mom and Dad made everything a comparison. Don't replace theirs with yours. She was quiet. Then she said, okay. A few days later, Miss Whitaker emailed me that formal accounting requests had been sent through counsel to Mom and Dad. She was careful with the language. There was no claim that someone was about to be arrested. No promise that every dollar would be recovered automatically. The transfers were old. Questions about authority, benefit, repayment, and possible defenses still had to be handled properly. What mattered was that the money now had to be explained. Not at a wedding, not at Aunt Carol's dining table, not through Dad's version of what Mom did or Mom's version of what Dad knew. In writing. That afternoon, Mom called. I let it ring until I finished the sentence I was typing at work. Then I answered, "What? Is that how you answer your mother now?" "It depends why she's calling. You know why. The accounting request. You are taking money from your own parents." I leaned back in my chair. There were several versions of me who would have argued with that sentence for 20 minutes. I chose the shortest one. "No, you took it from Grandma. I'm just not helping you call it something else." Mom inhaled sharply. "We spent that money on family." "You've said that." "Kayla benefited." "Yes. Your father did too." "Yes. So why are we the only people being punished?" I looked out my office window. Kayla is dealing with what she did. She didn't do anything. She repeated a lie about me for years. That is not the same thing as money. I didn't say it was. You're turning everyone against us. No. Then what do you call what Kayla did? Correcting herself. Mom laughed bitterly. She got that language from you. No, she got it from what happened. You're enjoying this. Dad had said the same thing. I wondered whether they had agreed on that accusation before they stopped agreeing on everything else. No. You expect me to believe that? I don't care what you believe about my feelings. The words came easily now. Mom went quiet. Then she said, "Your grandmother would not want this." That one still had teeth. Less than before. Grandma wanted her money paid back. She wanted family. She wanted both. She spent too long pretending one had to be sacrificed for the other. Mom said nothing. I thought of Grandma's private letter. I told myself I was protecting this family. The truth is, I was protecting myself from watching it break. I understood the sentence more every week. Mom finally said, "Kenneth is blaming everything on me." "I know. You're letting him." "No." He told the trustee I controlled the accounts. "You did. So that's it? What do you want me to do?" "Tell them he was part of it. I already gave them everything I have." Mom's voice changed. "You're still defending him." I closed my eyes. "No, Mom, I'm refusing to lie for you. I didn't ask you to lie. You want me to say more than I can prove. Because Dad is trying to leave you holding the consequences. He deserves consequences too." "Yes. So help me." There was something almost desperate in it. For years, Mom had managed everyone else's emergencies. Now she had one nobody would let her manage. "I'm not your witness against Dad," I said. "And I'm not his witness against you. Lauren, the records stay the same no matter who I'm angry with." I ended the call. That evening, I told Ethan what she had said. He listened, then asked, "Did it make you feel guilty?" "A little." "About what?" "That she sounds scared." "Does scared mean innocent?" "No." "Does scared mean you have to fix it?" I looked at him. "No." He nodded. "That's probably the answer." 2 weeks passed before Kayla asked to come over. She arrived on a Sunday afternoon, carrying the same presentation box I had last seen at my wedding. I knew what was inside before she set it on the table. For a second, neither of us touched it. Kayla had kept the necklace secure since the wedding, first in the hotel safe, then at home. I had never asked for it back because I had wanted one thing to remain entirely her choice. Now she pushed the box toward me. "Grandma left this to you." I looked at her. That's where it should have ended. I opened the box. The necklace lay against dark velvet exactly as I remembered it. Except now, I could no longer see it, without also seeing Mom fastening it around Kayla's neck and Dad standing in the first row, telling everyone which daughter deserved it. I touched the edge of the pendant. "Why now?" Kayla took a breath. "Because I know why I'm giving it back." I waited. Not because the trust says it's yours. Not because Mom shouldn't have put it on me. Not because I'm trying to get you to forgive me. She looked down at the box. I'm giving it back because I accepted something that I knew was meant for you before I ever read Grandma's letter. That was true. At the wedding, Kayla had been confused. But she had not been confused about whose necklace it was supposed to be. She continued, I didn't know about the money, but I knew taking this would hurt you. I said nothing. I told myself if Grandma had changed her mind, then it wasn't my fault. But Grandma hadn't changed her mind. No. And you didn't ask? No. I closed the box. Thank you for bringing it back. Kayla looked almost disappointed. Not because she wanted more praise. Because some part of her had probably hoped the act would create a larger emotional moment. A hug. A clean reset. A scene where the necklace moved from one sister to another, and everything wrong between us moved with it. Real life was slower. She nodded. You're welcome. We sat there for another minute. Then Kayla asked, Do you think we can ever go back? I looked at her. Back to what? She frowned. You know, I don't. To being sisters. We are sisters. That isn't what I mean. I know. I thought about the years before Grandma's money disappeared. We had not been best friends then either. I had been the older sister who advised. Kayla had been the younger sister who resented advice and still called when something went wrong. Mom had translated our differences into evidence that Kayla was warm and I was difficult. Going back did not sound appealing. No, I said. Kayla's face fell. But we can see what we become. She looked at me carefully. That sounds very Lauren. It probably is. She gave a faint smile. I continued. We're not pretending the last 6 years didn't happen. I'm not asking that. Good. And I don't want you choosing my side because you're angry with Mom and Dad. Her smile disappeared. I'm not. I'm serious. Sue, am I? Then don't choose my side. She frowned. What am I supposed to choose? Whatever you can defend when neither of us is in the room. Kayla stared at me for several seconds. Then she nodded. That's harder. Yes. Probably healthier. Unfortunately. She laughed. I did too. Not much. Enough. After she left, I carried the jewelry box upstairs. Ethan was working in the spare bedroom and called out to ask whether everything was okay. Yeah. I went into our bedroom alone. I opened the box again. Grandma's necklace was back where everyone had always known it belonged. For years, I thought that would have felt like winning. It didn't. It felt quieter than that. I opened the drawer of my nightstand and took out Grandma's second envelope. For Lauren. Only. I had not reread it since my wedding day. I placed it beside the necklace. The pendant caught the light from the window. For several minutes, I sat on the edge of the bed looking at both things Grandma had left me. One had started a fight over who deserved to wear it. The other had never belonged to anyone but me. I picked up the letter and ran my thumb over Grandma's handwriting. Then I realized there was one line near the end I could no longer remember exactly. And for the first time since the wedding, I wanted to read it again. By July, the legal side of Grandma's money had become almost boring, which was probably the healthiest thing that could have happened to it. There were no police cars outside my parents' house. No dramatic courtroom scene. No judge pounding a gavel while somebody finally confessed under pressure. Miss Whitaker and the attorneys handled the part my family had avoided for 6 years. Numbers, documents, explanations, and consequences. Mom and Dad eventually agreed to a negotiated repayment arrangement rather than spend more money fighting over transactions they had already admitted benefiting from. The exact schedule was none of my business, and for once, I was comfortable with that. The trust had counsel. The accounting had records. Nobody needed me standing over the process with a spreadsheet to make sure grown adults fulfilled obligations they had created for themselves. That was new for me. Competence had always been one of the ways I kept myself safe. If a situation looked unstable, I organized it. If somebody forgot a deadline, I remembered it. If an argument became vague, I reduced it to facts. At work, those instincts made me good at what I did. In my family, they had often made me the person everyone quietly expected to absorb whatever they could not manage. I had resented that expectation while also feeding it. I complained that everyone treated me like the reliable one, then stepped in the moment things looked unreliable. The accounting process gave me a chance to do something different. I gave Miss Whitaker what I had. I answered questions when asked. Then I let the professionals handle the rest. What I did know was that Dad's version of events no longer worked. He could not say Mom acted alone without running into his emails, his judgment, Grandma's ledger, the messages he had sent Kayla, and the words he had spoken in that conference room while trying to correct Mom. Mom could not say she had simply done what any loving mother would do without confronting the fact that Grandma had said no and Mom had decided no did not apply to her. Neither of them went to jail. Neither lost the house. There was no sudden bankruptcy, public scandal, or dramatic collapse designed to make the punishment look bigger than the offense. Their consequences were more fitting. They had to repay money they had once treated as theirs to redistribute, pay their own professional fees, and live with 2 daughters who no longer accepted their explanations as moral truth. Their marriage survived, at least technically. I learned that mostly through Kayla, who still had limited contact with them. Mom blamed Dad for stepping backward the moment the records became dangerous. Dad blamed Mom for creating a problem he claimed he had spent years trying to contain. They still lived in the same house, but according to Kayla, they had stopped agreeing on what had happened even when nobody else was listening. Mom insisted Dad had encouraged every major decision. Dad insisted encouragement was not the same thing as control. She accused him of using her. He accused her of acting first and expecting him to clean up the mess. I found it fitting that the marriage they had protected partly by sacrificing my reputation was now trapped inside the very secret they had used me to protect. Dad made one final attempt with me in late June. He did it by text, which was probably the only way he could have reached me by then without hearing me say no in real time. I was standing in a grocery store, comparing 2 bottles of olive oil when my phone buzzed. His message was simple. This family should not end over money. 6 months earlier, that sentence would have changed my entire evening. I would have replayed it, analyzed the wording, wondered whether not answering made me cruel, wondered whether answering made me weak, and probably carried the argument home with me. That afternoon, I put 1 bottle back on the shelf, finished the rest of my shopping, loaded the groceries into my car, and only then sat behind the wheel and replied, "It didn't end over money. It ended when you decided my name was cheaper than telling the truth." Dad responded less than a minute later. That is an unfair way to describe what happened. I read it once, locked my phone, and drove home. That was the end of the conversation. Not because I had won the argument. I had stopped participating in the argument. There was a difference I had not understood before. Winning still required the other person to recognize something. Ending the argument only required me to decide that I was finished lending my time to a version of events that had already been disproved. Mom tried twice more that summer. The first time, she sent me a long email explaining that she had acted out of fear and love, that mothers sometimes made impossible decisions, and that someday I might understand the pressure of watching a child fail when I had the power to help. I read the whole thing once, because I had promised myself I would not confuse boundaries with avoidance anymore. She apologized for how things unfolded. She apologized that I had felt abandoned. She apologized that the family had become divided. She did not apologize for using Grandma's money after Grandma refused. She did not apologize for letting my name absorb the blame. She did not apologize for using my wedding to publicly crown Kayla as the daughter who deserved what Grandma had left me. I did not answer. The second time, Mom sent a photograph of Grandma holding Kayla and me when we were little. I was probably 8, Kayla was 2. Grandma sat between us on her old floral couch with one arm around each of us. My hair was pulled into a crooked ponytail. Kayla had both fists wrapped around one of Grandma's fingers. Under the photo, Mom wrote, "She would hate what this family has become." That one hurt more because it was partly true. Grandma would have hated it. She also would have understood why it happened. I sat on the edge of my bed staring at the photograph until I finally opened the drawer of my nightstand and took out Grandma's private letter. I found the line I had almost forgotten. I told myself I was protecting this family. The truth is, I was protecting myself from watching it break. Grandma had already answered Mom. I didn't need to. By then, Kayla and I had found something like a rhythm. I would not call it reconciliation because that word makes damaged relationships sound as if they can be returned to an earlier setting if everyone presses the right buttons. We did not go back. That was the point. We met for coffee sometimes. Once for lunch. She came over one Saturday to help Ethan and me assemble shelves for the home office. Discovered neither of us had read the instructions correctly, and laughed so hard she had to sit on the floor. A month earlier, I would have searched a moment like that for meaning. Was this forgiveness? Were we healing? Did it prove she had changed? Instead, it was simply an afternoon where my sister came to my house and nobody discussed Grandma's money for 3 hours. That felt more promising than any dramatic apology. Kayla also changed things I had not asked her to change. In May, her car needed a repair expensive enough that the old Kayla would have called Mom before the mechanic finished the estimate. Mom offered to pay. Kayla declined and arranged a payment plan with the repair shop instead. She told me about it over coffee. Then immediately said, "I'm not telling you because I want praise." "Good," I said. She rolled her eyes. "I knew you'd say that." "Then why tell me?" "Because 6 months ago, I would have called Mom before I even knew the total." "That's probably true. And now I want to know I can solve something without somebody turning it into a reason I owe them." That was the first time I heard Kayla describe our family system without borrowing language from Mom or Dad. She was not calling Mom controlling. She was not calling herself weak. She was simply noticing the exchange that had always existed beneath the help. Rescue bought access. Rescue bought loyalty. Rescue created a debt nobody wrote down but everybody understood. I respected that. I also resisted the urge to turn her progress into my project. When she complained about money, I did not offer to make her a budget. When she asked what I thought she should do about Mom's guilt messages, I told her what boundary had worked for me, but did not tell her to copy it. When she apologized for something from 6 years earlier, I accepted the apology if it was specific and let silence follow if it wasn't. That was difficult for me in ways I had not expected. I liked clarity. I liked plans. I liked measurable improvement. Relationships did not offer any of those things on command. One afternoon in July, Kayla asked me a question I knew had been coming. We were sitting outside a cafe downtown. The heat had finally settled over Columbus, and condensation ran down the side of her iced tea while she moved the straw in circles. "Do you trust me?" I looked at her. "More than I did in January." She made a face. "That is such an operations director answer." "It's an accurate answer." "I know." She looked toward the street. "Do you think you ever will?" "I don't know." 6 months earlier, that answer would have caused an argument. Kayla would have accused me of holding a grudge. I would have explained why the word grudge did not apply. Mom would somehow have heard about it and turned the conversation into evidence that I punished people forever. Dad would have suggested everyone let things go. Kayla only nodded. No argument. No demand. No reminder that we were sisters. That response told me more than if she had sworn I could trust her forever. Trust was not a necklace. Nobody handed it back in a box and restored ownership. It accumulated. Or it didn't. The necklace itself stayed in my bedroom for most of the summer. I had not worn it since Kayla returned it. At first, I thought that was because too much had happened around it. Every time I opened the box, I saw Mom walking past me at the altar. I heard Dad say, "It belongs to the daughter who deserves it." I saw Kayla pulling at the clasp. I remembered almost 100 guests turning their attention from my wedding vows to a family judgment that had been waiting 6 years for a stage. Then, one evening in July, Ethan and I were getting ready for dinner at a small restaurant for our 6-month wedding anniversary. Nothing formal, no guests, no family, no speeches. I was standing in front of the bedroom mirror, fastening earrings when I noticed the jewelry box on the dresser. I opened it. The necklace lay against the velvet, exactly as I had left it. Ethan appeared in the doorway behind me. "You thinking about wearing it?" "I don't know." "You don't have to." "I know." He leaned against the doorframe. "You also don't have to wait until it means nothing." I looked at him in the mirror. That sounds annoyingly wise. I've been practicing. I picked up the necklace. For months, everyone had treated it like a verdict. Kayla returned it, therefore maybe she was sorry enough. Dad had treated it like proof of who deserved family approval. Mom had used it like a correction to Grandma's judgment. Even I had started to look at it as if getting it back meant something had finally been restored. I was tired of the object having a vote. I fastened it around my neck. The pendant rested just below my collarbone. I looked at myself. Nothing happened. No rush of vindication. No wave of grief powerful enough to knock the air out of me. No sudden feeling that Grandma was in the room. It was simply a necklace that had belonged to a woman I loved, who had made mistakes, who had eventually tried to correct one of them. Mine. That was enough? Ethan smiled. Looks good. Very deep. I save my wisdom for important moments. We went to dinner. Nobody recognized the necklace. Nobody asked what it meant. Nobody cared who deserved it. I liked it better that way. Later that night, after Ethan fell asleep, I took Grandma's second letter out again. By then, I had read it several times, but certain lines seemed to change depending on what had happened around me. The first time I read it at the wedding, one sentence had mattered most. I am sorry. In March, the line about silence pretending to be peace had mattered more. That summer, I kept returning to something else. Do not spend your life proving what I already knew about you. At first, I thought Grandma was telling me I did not need my family's approval. I had already known that. By summer, I understood something more uncomfortable. Not needing approval did not mean allowing damaging lies to stand because I was strong enough to survive them. For years, I had confused disengagement with freedom. When my parents accused me, I denied it. I asked for evidence. When they had none and relatives chose to believe them anyway, I walked away. I told myself that if people wanted to believe something absurd without proof, that was their problem. In one sense, I had been right. I did not owe anyone endless defenses. I did not need to spend every family dinner arguing for my character. But while I was building a life away from them, their version of me stayed behind. Every year, it became easier to repeat because nobody challenged it anymore. The first year, people said there had been questions about Grandma's money. The second year, people remembered that I had been involved. By the third, I had become the granddaughter who took money. By the sixth, Dad could stand at my wedding and call Kayla the daughter who deserves it, without explaining what she supposedly deserved more than I did. A lie does not always get stronger because new evidence appears. Sometimes it gets stronger because everyone gets tired of asking where the evidence was. My mistake had not been leaving. Leaving was probably one of the healthiest things I had done. My mistake was believing that because I no longer needed their opinion, their dishonesty no longer mattered. Those were not the same thing. Grandma's letter forced me to confront another distinction I had avoided. She loved me. She also failed me. For a long time, I had been afraid to hold both truths because anger at Grandma felt disloyal. She was the person who believed me when everyone else chose convenience. She called me. She invited me over. She never looked at me like a thief. When my parents' version of me became family history, Grandma remained the one place where I did not have to defend myself. But she knew. She knew they were lying. She knew they were letting me carry the consequences. She had documents. She had the authority of the person whose money had actually been taken. And she waited. She waited because she thought Patricia and Kenneth would repay the money. She waited because she did not want Kayla dragged into something Kayla had not knowingly caused. She waited because she believed exposing the truth would break the family. Her apology did not erase that. What it did was name it. That mattered more. I stopped needing to make Grandma perfect in order to love her. That was another kind of freedom. People talk about closure as if somebody hands it to you. An apology, a confession, a returned heirloom, a legal agreement, a family member finally saying, "You were right." I got pieces of all of those things. None of them closed anything on their own. What changed me was deciding what I would do after I had the truth. I did not reconcile with my parents. I did not launch a campaign against them either. I did not call relatives to make sure they knew every ugly detail of the conference room fight. I did not monitor Mom and Dad's repayment agreement or ask Kayla for updates about whether they were miserable. They became people whose choices I understood and whose lives I no longer managed. That was more peaceful than revenge fantasies had ever been. Kayla remained complicated. So did I. She had been selfish. I had been proud. She had accepted convenient explanations. I had decided one defense of myself should be enough for a lifetime. She had liked being the golden daughter. I had taken a certain pride in being the daughter who needed nothing. Neither role had been good for us. Mom needed someone to rescue, because rescue made control look like love. Dad needed someone else to absorb consequences, because avoidance made cowardice look like reason. Kayla needed to believe being saved meant being valued. I needed to believe surviving without them meant they could no longer hurt me. Grandma, maybe more than any of us, needed to believe silence could hold a family together. By the end, all of those beliefs had cost somebody else something. A week before I started telling this story, Kayla called me and asked whether I wanted to meet for lunch. I was at work, staring at a calendar already packed with meetings. 1 o'clock Thursday? Your usual place? Sure. She hesitated. Mom texted me again. I leaned back. What did she want? She asked if I think you'll ever forgive her. What did you say? That she should ask you. I smiled. Good answer. I thought so. And did she? No? That's also an answer. Kayla laughed. Then she said, see you Thursday. When the call ended, I looked around my office for a moment and realized how ordinary the day felt. I had work waiting. Ethan had texted asking whether we needed anything from the store. Kayla and I had lunch plans. My parents existed somewhere across town with problems that were no longer mine to organize. That evening, I went home and noticed the framed wedding photograph on the shelf beside our living room window. It had been taken after my parents left the ceremony. Ethan was looking at me. I was laughing at something the officiant had said. No necklace. No letter. No visible evidence that 10 minutes earlier my family had almost turned the ceremony into a public trial of my worth. I loved that photograph. Grandma had written that she hoped I got the home I wanted, work I was proud of, peaceful mornings, and people who never asked me to become smaller so they could stay comfortable. For years, I thought those things would feel like prizes I earned after surviving my family. They didn't. They felt ordinary. Coffee before work. Ethan asking if I wanted the window open. A Saturday where Kayla helped build a shelf badly. A phone that could ring with my parents' names without controlling what happened next. A necklace I could wear to dinner without needing anyone to know its history. Ordinary turned out to be what I had wanted all along. I used to think walking away was the same as being free. It wasn't. Walking away created distance. Truth created clarity. Boundaries created freedom. The necklace came back to me eventually. My name came back first. But the life Grandma wanted for me was the only inheritance no one could hold, redirect, or fasten around somebody else's neck. I had to build that myself. You do not have to keep carrying a lie just because you are strong enough to survive it. Set boundaries, document the truth, and refuse to let guilt turn someone else's choices into your responsibility. Forgiveness can wait. Accountability should not. Protect your peace without surrendering your voice. And remember that love without respect is not healthy loyalty. If this story gave you something, subscribe to the channel for more.